Good morning. It's 9 a.m. on Wednesday, March 6, 2024, and this meeting is now called to order in the council chambers at City Hall, 1123 Lake Street, Sandpoint, Idaho. This meeting has been called for the purpose of a training session for the city's elected officials and to review the city's strategic plan. This is an open meeting. The public is welcome to attend, observe, but there will be no opportunity for public comment at this morning. No action will be taken during this meeting. For the record, I am Mayor Jeremy Grimm. Also present are Council President Jason Welker, Councilors Deb Rule, Council Kyle Schreiber, and Councilwoman Pam Duquette. Councilor Joe Spear is absent, and Councilman Justin Dick is running a few minutes late. Also in attendance are City Legal Counsel Fonda Jokovic and Zach Jones, along with Finance Director Sarah Linz, Human Resource and Risk Manager Ellie Ellison, and City Clerk Melissa Ward. Sarah Linz and ISIS will be joining during the strategic planning objective session portion. This time, if everyone please stand, I'll lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Set. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'll now yield the floor to Fonda to kick off our training session. Thank you, Fonda.
Right on the date.
For us today. Actually, before I'll just a brief council update. I just 5 minutes ago signed up for remote testimony on House Bill 506, which is the short-term rental. That's going to be 12:30 our time on Thursday the 7th. That bill has made it to the floor, and to the hearing portion here. I'm gonna just comment that basically the government works closest to the people, that we have a robust number of vacation rentals. Our current policies seem to be working well and provide a good balance, and that basically the expansion of vacation rentals, especially by non-site or on-site property owners, can erode our housing, the quantity of housing in our community, which directly affects our economic prosperity and ability for our businesses to expand and hire employees with housing. So
thank you for taking the time to comment on that.
Yeah, I know the council didn't take a formal proclamation or motion or anything on it, but if anyone's concerned about those types of comments, please let me know. If you don't know, we allow owner-occupied short-term rentals in our residential districts, basically an unlimited number with inspections, fire inspection initially, and then self-inspection afterwards. And we allow, this is the rub, we only allow 35 non-resident vacation short-term rentals. And this bill specifically targets a couple of communities, McCall, maybe Lava Hot Springs, and Sandpoint. And as proposed, it would basically strip us of all ability to do anything except for a business license. That's where that stands, hopefully. And there is a case, Lava Hot Springs is going to the Supreme Court about this issue, which is another reason that the legislation should probably be paused to see what the Supreme Court has to say on it. But it's being sponsored by, I believe, Jordan, a gentleman out of greater Coeur d'Alene area.
The bill is being sponsored by. So does the bill target cities of specific sizes, or is it all cities in Idaho?
It basically says that no city shall regulate vacation rentals, short-term rentals, any different.
As far as you know, are there, besides us, McCall and Lava Hot Springs, are there other cities that do regulate vacation rentals?
Those are the three that go beyond anything. We're part of the Resort Cities Coalition, and I have weekly meetings with that group, and we have a lobbyist who keeps us informed. Those are the three that have come up. I don't know the whole statewide sort of landscape on who does what, but the three of us were identified as three that go beyond just a registration permit or something like that.
I know that a lot of people commented
And
Garth's announcement I wrote as a citizen.
And I spoke to Sage directly, who's on this House committee, expressed my concerns. He agreed that there's some challenges. He didn't take a position really. Mayor of, I think, Ketchum wrote a pretty strong editorial. So there have been some public notices. We'll see. It's this balance. They're saying it's a property rights issue. I make the point that having random people in your neighborhood next door every day erodes what a neighborhood is, and that it's truly a commercial use, even if the state doesn't call it that. So.
And neighbors have private property rights.
That's the other point. Yeah. So anyways, that was just an update. Sorry.
No, I think that's great.
Just to add, I also sent comment and sent something to Dixon, and there was a beautiful piece on the radio this morning about the town of Gardner and how on VRBOs and Gardner and how, you know, there's just not housing for the teachers and everybody else that, you know, takes care of all the employees that are within the national park. And they were talking about just how that overflows into different, you know, gateway types of cities. And so it's just,
yeah. Where did you hear that on the radio? What radio?
There's an NPR this morning.
Good.
So you could pull that up and listen to that.
So you're going to provide comments at the hearing?
I'm going to testify.
I'm going to testify. It might be useful just to send your bullet points out to council ahead of time so that they know what your bullet points are and they can add to or comment on that ahead of time. That way you get a more unified.
And lacking any council objection, I could say this is the position of the city.
Yes. Yes.
Is that today?
The hearing's tomorrow at 12:30 our time. There is a registration link. They don't believe they're going to allow too many people to speak. You know, they think there may be a couple, and I get 2 minutes. So,
and it doesn't have to be elaborate. Just your bullet points.
Yeah. If there are, they did say if there are neighbors who've had negative experiences, that would be powerful. If there are property owners who've had Snoop and friends in the hot tub next to them until 3 a.m. while they're recovering from chemo treatment and can't sleep, that would be.
Are sleeping.
I seem to recall, you might remember this, the house, the big mansion down by 3rd Avenue Pier. There were quite a lot of complaints about the parties going. People were renting that for like wedding parties.
Yeah, we fixed that.
Do we have any neighbors who could testify to that?
Not by tomorrow afternoon,
yeah.
I'm sure.
Maybe write letters though to say it or something.
Pulling the police report on that might be helpful.
There were a lot of
part of your bullet point. You could say so many police reports were blah blah blah.
That's an excellent idea to have.
Well, and I think if I remember correctly, they had registered as a short-term rental, but they had advertised then as a wedding venue without a proper license.
That's exactly what they did. So I remember that quite clearly, surprisingly. I don't remember them all quite clearly, but that one.
But to be honest, like, what's the difference if we have 150 new short-term rentals in town? A lot of them are going to use for parties. Let's be honest, of one type or another.
I think that's a great example of what happened. The big property, but there wasn't sufficient parking.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you for the great feedback. With that, we'll turn it over to Fonda for an education, an update, and refresher on how we do this stuff called government.
Perfect. So this is one of my favorite days, just so you know. This is one of the things I love the most, is to educate and train, but also have this opportunity to get some face time with each of you to ask questions as we go through this. This is not intended for me just to be, or Zach and I just to be talking at you. It's really intended to be an interactive process. So stop us at any point when you have questions, because some of this we're far enough into, for the two of you especially, we're far enough into your term now that you've had experience with what it's like to be on the dais and a variety of different decisions that come at you. But this information will give you some more meat on those different types of decisions and the different responsibilities that you have as council members, and it's probably, hopefully, going to trigger some, you know, thought-provoking questions for today. We have to be careful not to talk about specific projects, if you will, or specific historic issues. We need to talk in terms of hypotheticals if you have questions, but we can always, Jason's the master at it, we can always create a hypothetical that gets to the heart of the question, so feel free. All right, I gave some of you copies of this, you could write on it. I didn't have enough for everybody, I don't think. If you guys want, I have one more if you want a paper copy.
Why not? That is better. You touched this one.
You touched the
Ew.
So here's what we're going to talk about today, are your legislative responsibilities, your fiscal responsibilities, your quasi judicial role, and that is what it says. You sit as a judge, your appointment and removal powers, and then some miscellaneous pieces. All of the information I'm going to give you is pulled out of Idaho Code, as well as the newly elected booklet that you received and the roles and responsibilities that come down from the Idaho Attorney General. And just so you know, if anything comes up with any of you regarding issues of decision-making or acting outside what I think is the course and scope of your responsibility, or even as a city, if there's something happening and we need direction beyond what we can get in the statute, because sometimes it's not really clear, the person that we contact is the Attorney General. So that's who we get our direction from, that's who we get our guidance from, and we have utilized the services of the Attorney General for issues in Sandpoint as well as other cities around several times. They can be very useful to us. And so just so you know, we're not out here just flying blind trying to make our best guess. We make our best guess, and then if we're really not sure, we do have the ability to utilize the Attorney General. So just for those of you that aren't aware of that. So your legislative responsibilities are this bullet point list that pretty much captures everything. And legislative is a decision that you're going to make that is policy. It's a more policy driven. It's not going to have a public hearing that is a quasi-judicial role. I'll help you differentiate between your legislative decision-making and your judicial decision-making. So legislative decisions are adopting ordinances that protect public health, safety, and welfare, which that's your job, is to have a city code that protects health, safety, and welfare. So when you're adopting an ordinance, that's a legislative responsibility. Annexing territory. So you have petitions for annexation that will come in. And when you're making a decision, even though it's a public hearing process, it's still a legislative decision. So annexing is legislative. Also, negotiating, well, we'll get to that in a minute. Your comprehensive plan, which you're, right in the heat of right now. So this is a great example. You're going to adopt a comprehensive plan by resolution, which, as you know, serves as the city's plan for growth and development. You're obligated to have a comprehensive plan by Idaho statute and give direction to your property owners as to what your vision is for growth and development in the city, where your priorities lie, and you adopt that comprehensive plan by resolution. So right now you're in the middle of workshops and you're going to finalize the draft. If there's substantive changes, the process it'll go back to planning and zoning. If there's not, it's going to come to you for a public hearing, and you're going to adopt it or make adjustments to it. So it's nice that I don't have to explain today the comprehensive plan piece, because you are intimately aware with what that is. Adopting zoning ordinance to regulate your land uses within the city, including permitted, conditionally permitted, and prohibited land uses within each zone. So the zoning ordinance, the ultimate adoption of your zoning ordinance or changes to your zoning ordinance, is legislative. Those are code changes. The zoning ordinance is all built into your city code, and anytime you make an adjustment to that affects a property right, that's a legislative decision. Any questions so far? Any of that?
Can you or off the top of your head, you know which chapters of our city code cover our zoning ordinance?
I don't off the top of my head because I work in too many. Jeremy probably knows it better than I do.
9 through 12,
It's 9, it's always 9 and 12 in one city or the other, and I never remember which one it is, but
Yeah.
9.
Yeah, starting in chapter 9, yeah. So just when coming from planning and zoning, that's like where we lived, was in those titles, 9 through 12. So when it comes to zoning ordinances, if you want to like just study those, that's where you're gonna look, Title 9. Mostly Title 9, then you've got like subdivision code is Title 10 and
And we're gonna talk about that
development
next.
fees, yeah.
I have a question about annexing territory. And this just kind of popped in my head because there's maybe a House bill that's trying to change the rules on that in process right now. But
area of city impact, for sure.
It was the Association of Idaho Cities sent out an email that said this is our position on it, and it had to do with annexation by force. Can you talk to a little bit?
I don't know what the proposed legislation is, but I can talk about the annexation statute.
Yeah, the current one.
So the differences between a city initiated annexation versus an applicant initiated annexation.
Exactly.
So a city initiated annexation is really what we're talking about here as a legislative decision on annexing territory. So there are times when maybe somebody came to you and you already issued an annexation agreement to them that said, we will annex you in the future if you agree to do X, Y, and Z. So there's those types of annexation. Or we provide city services is a great one. You provide city services outside of your city boundaries and your properties that are contiguous. They will have already agreed to be annexed if we initiate a city initiated annexation because they accepted those city services. So consent comes with the acceptance of that city service, things like that.
Okay.
Then there's applicant driven annexations where somebody comes in and says, we're contiguous to the city. We want to be annexed into the city so that we can have city services. We're willing to. Usually it comes simultaneously with a subdivision application of some kind or some intent to subdivide. And the incentive for them is they can generally subdivide into more lots if they come into the city boundaries rather than if they're in the county. So that'll be the reasons why.
Okay.
And those will always be in our ACI because they're contiguous to the city. And we are going to get to negotiations with the county regarding our area of city impact in a minute, but it becomes really important the terms that we put in place with the county on that area of city impact agreement when we're looking at whether or not the city's intention really is to expand outside its boundaries or not. So there's a lot that goes into annexation analysis. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. So in terms of somebody applying to annex into the city, is it possible for the city to deny that request? And is that common?
I have lots of like that. Well, I can say it. I mean, the city of Hayden right now, their council's made it very public that they are going to very critically analyze an annexation request.
Okay.
Because of service pressures.
Yeah.
Public service pressure.
And then when it's city initiated, this House bill got me thinking because it talked about properties that didn't want to be annexed but would be completely landlocked at that point, or
they'd be an
enclave.
island. Yeah, an enclave or an island.
Right. Yeah. So is there specific rules for that?
Yeah, city can do what's called a forced annexation, where it goes through the process of notifying all of the property owners, notifying the surrounding property owners, having public hearings and public input, but the city has a right under the statute to do a city initiated annexation over objection is what it's called.
Okay.
An annexation over objection.
Okay. And is that usually the only circumstance that's done, or is there other circumstances in which somebody would be?
So you might have a city initiated annexation where, oh my goodness, let's say you have somewhat of not a full enclave, but you have some parcels that are like in a little island, and you have a transportation master plan that says and I'm just making this up because that says you're going to improve a main arterial way far north, and then you're going to create by improving that arterial and annexing into the city right of way, you're going to create even a worse enclave than is already there. So you may look at a city initiated annexation for something like that. It has to really check a lot of boxes to force people to annex over objection.
Sure. Okay.
Pretty controversial. We have a real strange lease right across from fairgrounds. I'll pull it up on in my section, but there's about 4 or 6 houses directly across the fairgrounds north of the LDS church, and they were in the city, and the people screamed and were very upset, and the city de-annexed them. So we have a surrounded, maybe 8 residents that's totally surrounded by the city, and we don't provide police and related city services to those people.
Okay.
Because they said, take us out. We don't want to be part of the city.
And they're already on like city utilities?
Yeah.
Because they were when the houses were built.
Yeah.
In the city. Interesting.
Yeah.
And then you can't take that away from somebody just because they were DNX.
Well, at the time, it was my understanding, it was so controversial that the council felt like, hey, you don't want to be part of the city, fine. But I've tried to de-annex property out of Dover, and they said no. Generally, you can make the argument that once you annex something, you want to keep tax revenue.
You're talking about these little 4 houses right there, not Vadelwood. That's not in the city.
No, those little ones.
Yeah.
So
I never noticed that was.
Yeah.
So that's a enclave of Bonner County.
Correct.
Inside the city.
So,
I represented a group of property
So,
owners years ago.
Here's the
Bonner.
fairgrounds.
Yep.
Here's the what's it called, the Pines or the Cedars, that subdivision behind the Mormon church. This little cul-de-sac right here is 4 houses, and it's not in the city.
Oh,
That is city.
Little manufactured houses. They've been there forever.
And this is Vadelwood up here, which is not the city.
Okay.
I represented a group of property owners in Bonners Ferry a number of years ago who suffered at the hands of a forced annexation by the city. And actually, we were successful on appeal in overturning that annexation. At the time, it was the only overturning of a forced annexation in the state of Idaho. They didn't want to be in the city, and the city had failed to follow all of the proper processes. So we had a district court decide that there did not have to be annexed.
Interesting.
The
But-
process is pretty outlined in statute.
It is
Okay.
50-222.
And there's 3 categories.
There's 3 categories.
And some, I mean, in Colorado, city and county of Denver, city has, I mean, practically annexed the whole county.
Right.
And once you go east of the Mississippi, counties, more of a land use kind of government thing, counties have very little land and do very little other than typically jails and maybe roads. So, back east of the Mississippi, it's frequently the cities touch cities, their boundaries. So, here, I mean, through the ACI, we could potentially force annex a lot, but you're gonna then be providing services to them, and that can get pretty expensive.
so those 4 little houses, if they don't have city police, do they have county sheriff?
Across the street.
Yeah. They don't need to.
So they get, they get services through the county anyway.
And some cities like Dover contract with the sheriff, or the sheriff provides police services. Dover doesn't have a police department.
So another legislative responsibility for you is to adopt a subdivision ordinance, setting the process for subdivision application fees and approval. So you are required to have a subdivision ordinance that allows people to subdivide their parcels in some manner or another. It's your decision as to the level of density or manner in which people can subdivide, but you do have to outline for them what the rules are. Subdivisions are one of those. If you've been around me long enough, you know that you've heard me say there are processes that come before you. Now, the subdivision application and public hearing is not legislative. We are only talking about the adoption of the ordinance for subdivision that is legislative. So to be really clear, but when we get to quasi-judicial, you'll hear me say, there are applications that come before you that are what are called matter of right applications. A person has a 5-acre parcel. They are proposing a subdivision that meets every element of your ordinance. They are completely not, they're not in conflict with your comprehensive plan. I mean, it's not that they have to be in compliance with, those aren't the words. They cannot be in conflict with your comprehensive plan. and their subdivision meets all of your statutory requirements, there's no wiggle room to deny those. You will be sued in a hot minute, and rightfully so. That's the whole balancing act of private property rights with the obligation in Idaho code for a city to have rules in place for development. And that's the tension. That's the appropriate amount of tension, right? It's your job to find the balance in that tension and what you think is best for the city as to where that tension should lie. Pam, you look like you have a question.
No,
Okay.
not a specific question.
All right.
I have a comment and a question on that one. One, if you're not aware, our insurer, ICRIM, they insure us against claims for everything but land use related issues.
Did you say everything but?
Everything
Correct.
but. So if you get a petition for judicial review filed on a land use related decision, our fees for defending that are not covered by ICRIM.
So land use is the biggest liability for any government entity or municipality or county in Idaho, and that they can be big. Was it Idaho County, member one, where a council member said something really stupid, the hot mic's on during the hearing?
Discriminatory.
I think it was $6 million. It was a school for special needs or maybe rehab school. They made them put in a bridge, I think a helicopter pad, like a fire truck. They went over the top to basically.
The city was imposing that on the school.
It was the county.
Or the county.
Putting it on the developer. Yeah. And then someone said something like, yeah, I don't remember what he said. There was something very inappropriate he said during the hearing, caught on mic, and they ended up losing $6 million, I believe, in that judgment against the county. I believe it almost bankrupted the county.
Wow.
So you can get into a lot of trouble on land use issues. So,
and I guess onto my questioning face is thinking of the county, but that's totally different. Because there was a big article today in the paper about what the county is looking at for people asking for variances, etc.
Sure. So in this particular conversation right now, we're just talking about your legislative obligation to have these ordinances in place, but we can get to some of those questions. And the county oftentimes is a great resource for exhibit A of what to do or what not to do. So
I guess it was a list of them.
my second question on that, or this is the question. So because, and maybe you cover it in the quasi judicial elements, because subdivision applications are really measured against the criteria of the ordinance. If you meet the standards, I've always said it's like getting a driver's license. You pass the test, you get it.
Yeah.
Do you have a comment on what's the benefit of having a public hearing on that? Because it seems to me people come out, get inflamed, feel like the more people come, they're going to really make a stink and scream and object. And then if you approve it, unless you explain it very clearly, they met the criteria, people will walk away frustrated with government.
So the Local Land Use Planning Act requires one public hearing on the subdivision application process, but that can be at planning and zoning. It does not have to be at council. Matter of fact, I have other cities where the only public hearing is at planning and zoning. And that's because planning and zoning is your filter, right? They're filtering all of these applications to bring up to council. That's where the presentation is made that they either meet all of the elements of code or there's some issues there. And that's where your affected parties. So remember, the other thing we'll talk about is what is the definition of an affected party? And that's, but one public hearing is where your affected parties have a right to come and speak in objection or support of the application. So you could have a process where your only public hearing is at planning and zoning and it comes to council as a public meeting action item instead of another public hearing. But half of the battle with people coming out and jumping up and down and screaming and yelling and they feeling like they're not heard is educating them on whether or not they're affected party and whether or not the appointeds or the electeds should be giving them or their testimony the amount of weight that they think it deserves. And that's an education piece. And remember, affected parties are within 300 feet of a application or a parcel that's subject to an application.
And just one quick follow-up. If we were to reduce our number of hearings and not have them at the council, would that still allow the council to interject or look at such things like extraordinary impacts? Or would we simply just kick it back down and say, no, hear it again, and we think there's concerns about extraordinary impacts?
So council absolutely has a right to kick it back for additional studies, which could be extraordinary impact analysis. Council also still has a right to say, you know what, this is contentious enough, or this has enough nuance to it, or it's a big enough project, we want a public hearing. So council could always still ask for a public hearing, or the applicant can ask for a second public hearing if they think it's important. But remember, if you were to make an adjustment to your code so that at council it's just a public meeting, the record's closed. So council doesn't get to come in and say, well, you know, I mean, the only thing council can do at that point is say I drove by the project and I laid eyes on it. That's it. There can be no new evidence considered at all at the council meeting.
Thought you weren't supposed to do that either.
Well, you can drive by and look. That's it. That's all you can do. You can't engage with anybody. You can't have a conversation with the applicant. You can't talk to the surrounding landowners. You can lay eyes on it yourself. That's it.
So what happens then if, let's say it's on the agenda and council gets a bunch of emails from people, and obviously we open that email, does that create a gray area of you've now taken testimony?
Violate the due process rights of the applicant.
Yeah.
And so you would need to disclose those emails, and the applicant would have a choice as to whether or not they wish to have a public hearing to rebut that information.
Okay.
And yeah, and it would have to be shared with everyone, so all decision makers have the same
Yes.
information. Do you cover
The person to share it with is Melissa.
Well, and those are the instructions given to the public. They're supposed to, they have one email address they're supposed to send all comments to.
Oh,
They
okay.
frequently do not follow those instructions.
Every week.
So we're all supposed to go to you.
It's supposed to, yes, both for P and Z, most of the time, and also for council, really for everything, just so that it's all filtered through one email address, and then I can then send it out to who it needs to go to, and also keep that record, which is another conversation hopefully we'll have at some point later this morning, the email beast.
Okay, so like on the webpage, it has everybody's name and contact.
Yep.
They all go to you if they.
No, it's different for a public hearing. Like if they just want to contact you with a general question or seek your support for something,
Okay.
that doesn't have to do with this quasi judicial type of public hearing that may be coming up. That's different. Not different necessarily for records, but different for the public hearing process.
And so the looking at a piece of a parcel that's under question, that's after it's been settled, after
We're going to get into that in a minute
Okay.
with quasi judicial. Right now, we're just talking about your obligation to adopt subdivision ordinance.
Okay.
That gives the property owners the rules of how they can subdivide, what it'll cost them to do it, and what they need to do to get approval.
Is that also Title IX?
Title 10?
10.
10?
So
Go ahead.
obviously there's already, this ordinance already exists,
Mhm.
so that obligation to create an ordinance is already done, but like, what's the process for amending it? And
Public hearing process to amend
it gets
your subdivision.
complicated, I'm sure, when somebody has bought a piece of property with the specific purpose of subdividing it, and then we change the ordinance before they have a chance to subdivide it.
You risk a taking place,
Right,
or changing their zoning.
okay.
So down zoning, meaning lowering their ability for density, can also be subject to a taking place.
As we update the comp plan, we're gonna have a new future land use map.
Oh boy, yes.
Is it a good idea to prioritize rezones so that the zoning matches the future land use map as quickly as possible to avoid that sort of situation? Because I could see a developer having acquired a piece of land, it's zoned a certain way, but that zoning, this is hypothetical, is no longer in compliance with our future land use map. We may say, oh, we intend to rezone that so it complies with our future land use map. But if we drag our feet on that and a subdivision application comes in, or a PUD or something, and it's like, oh, we didn't want that there,
So this is
that's on us. We should have rezoned quickly.
that question is a really good sort of pause point to talk about the detailed differences between your zoning designation and your future land use map, because the public is very confused about this. So your actual on the ground zoning is in your code. This is what your zones are. Somebody has a zoning designation. That zoning designation tells them they can go to the code, and the code will tell them exactly what they can do on their land for that zone. Your future land use map is not rooted in zoning, it's rooted in uses. Future land use map. So even though your future land use map designation might match your zones, it's not an entitlement to upzone. And it's also not an obligation on your part to downzone. This is where we see the uses for these properties in the future. That's why your future land use map historically was context areas and your zones were, you know, single family residential, multifamily, and they didn't match. That in and of itself creates confusion. So I think you're working towards having those match, but I will caution you that that's going to lead people to the mindset of this is what the zone I'm entitled to in the future. And that's not the case. It's a use. And so we want to be really careful as we educate the public on this. And we want to be really careful what we do with anybody's underlying zone as a result of adopting a new future land use map.
And I'd also add, correct me if you have a different opinion, Fonda, but the comp plan is let's say a 15 to 20 year vision. Just because something is in the land use map and is a higher density in the future, doesn't mean that we need to do that today. That is what we aspire to. So maybe for commercial, for example, maybe we have plenty of commercial space right now and we don't need to rezone this area slated, but at such time that we run out of commercial space, that's when we would say, oh, we need to add more commercial. We would entertain a comp plan or a zone change based on the comp plan.
I've seen more like private owner initiated rezone requests.
Yes.
And in order for those to be approved, they have to be in compliance with the future land use map. So
not in conflict. Otherwise they can come in, and you've seen these too. You've seen an application for a zone change partnered with a request to amend the comprehensive plan,
right.
Which is to amend the use on the future land use map.
Quite recently we've seen those.
Yes. And so you're getting that because the future land use map isn't in alignment with what they want to do with their zone change.
So it's a tough one, right?
It's really tough.
Like, you're asking us to amend our comprehensive plan so that you can get a rezone, so that you can do what you're currently not allowed to do because it's not in compliance with code or our comp plan. There has to be a really good argument for that.
I was going to say, what kind of rights do
Can we talk about a past
have?
example?
No.
No. Okay.
And we're actually not in quasi judicial hearings right now.
Yeah.
Yet. We'll get there.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe can I talk to him about it outside of this meeting?
Yes.
Okay. I'll give you a real example outside of this meeting.
Our stories. Next on your legislative decision-making list is your obligation, which this will be coming up, to negotiate with the county commissioners an area of city impact for future urbanization and annexation into the city and the land use regulations that will apply within the area. So you will, you negotiate with the county to say, these are the areas outside of our city boundaries that we identify as potential annexation in the future, that we would be interested in annexing in the future. And then with the county, you negotiate all the terms of what happens for development in the ACI between now and any time that we might want to annex these parcels. So that's a comprehensive process. We haven't done it for how many years, Jeremy?
2006.
I knew it was a long time ago. Yeah, so you're right. I mean, it's time to do a new ACI agreement with the county. There's different things that you can negotiate in that process. You can say, well, you'll identify an exclusive tier. So this is where I wanted to kind of land with your previous question about, are we obligated to annex? If you identify parcels in your exclusive tier ACI, you are essentially saying, when you come forward to annex, we will accept you. So if you don't have any desire to annex anytime in the near future, when you negotiate with the county, you may not want to have an exclusive tier ACI, but your exclusive tier is where you're saying to the county and to those landowners, like, you're our target audience. We want you at some point in the future. And by saying that in your ACI agreement, you are essentially saying when you come forward to annex, we would have to find a reason to deny you, and you'd be hard pressed to find that reason. There are parts and pieces you can negotiate, like if a property contiguous to our city boundaries is going to develop, it needs to develop consistent with our development codes. That gets a little messy, but you can do that. You can put rules around who you're going to serve utilities to. You can say, if we're going to serve outside of our boundaries in our ACI, that those parcels need to consent to annexation if we do a city initiated annexation. There's this negotiation on ACI is really important, not just to identify the area of city impact, that's what it's called, but all of the terms with the county in relationship to development within the ACI. Jeremy, do you have any comment on that?
A couple other things, and I'll touch on this on my strategic priorities.
We didn't check our presentations with each other. So.
I mean, the biggest one that comes to mind right now is outside of Kootenai. That was in the Providence Park. That was in the Kootenai ACI, and they objected to that subdivision development. So if development occurs in the ACI, the typical county notice is extended by, I believe, 40 days, where the county actually sends a notice to the city in their ACI, and the city gets to respond. The council gets to take action on those requests. So if we had something in our ACI big subdivision, we would be noticed. It historically was brought to the council. The council gets to make a comment on it, such as, please install curb, gutter, and sidewalk. Here's our sidewalk standards. Or please leave a right of way for a future road, or we have a path plan for there, or we have a water line, please, include an easement for a water line. So those are the current things that we can ask for. That agreement would help strengthen that. Typically the county doesn't really listen to the city's comments that much. I mean, we do it sometimes, but what happened in Kootenai was an issue. The other one is we could potentially work in this discussion out development impact fees in the ACI. West of the railroad tracks, most of our ACI, great example. Pine, Baldy, Gooby, those three points where you cross into the ACI, they're very narrow. We know that they're going to have to expand at some point to satisfy the traffic that's going to be generated from the ACI. As an impact fee, we could potentially work with the county and say, why should Sandpoint taxpayers have to pay for the road improvements to widen those 3 checkpoints that go into the ACI? Let's implement a transportation or circulation impact fee in the ACI. So as growth occurs out there, the money is there to upgrade those underpasses or overpasses, so that the folks causing the growth are paying for the upgraded services they need. We could potentially look at parks too. So impact fees are another thing we could potentially negotiate in this area of city impact discussion, and see how that gets complex, building permits when it's collected and all that, but it is possible. So there's a lot of great discussion with the county to be had on ACIs. And I'd say the most powerful thing we could do is work with our cities and approach the county as a collective of cities and say, here's what all of your cities agree to and want. So we're not negotiating on a unilateral basis. We have more bargaining power if we could come together. So it's going to be a whole thing to deal with.
So a couple comments, questions. You mentioned, was this a theoretical, futuristic, or future possibility of with the new consolidated ACI, subdivision requests within the ACI would have to come to planning and zoning or city council for review?
They would only come to your planning director for review. It wouldn't come.
But that's not current. We don't currently have it.
Historically, when I was planning director, they all came to the council.
I can't think of that happening once in the last 5 years.
There's been a few things that haven't happened. So,
I can say that's not happened.
Yeah.
So they used to come to the council for council comment.
For comment. But no, there's no there's not currently any authority. We can't require curbs or sidewalks to be installed in the ACI.
No, but
could in the future we theoretically do that in a new ACI agreement? Like they are held to the same development standards as subdivisions within city limits.
That's what Hayden has with Kootenai County on all properties contiguous to the Hayden boundary.
You can agree where the county applies the city ordinance.
Yes. To
in,
develop.
in their process of
The county would have to agree to that as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
So this is what I'm concerned about, is the opposition we're gonna face from the county of the city imposing any regulations on it.
And that's why coming to the county as 5 towns, Kootenai, Ponderay, Dover, Sandpoint, maybe even Priest River, who knows? We can come and we have a lot more power to say, enough of this. We want to make sure that when we do annex these properties, we have standards such as they have sidewalks, maybe stormwater, gutters, curbs.
Well, setbacks, that they're not non-conforming immediately.
So, yeah,
Otherwise we get, let's say 10, 20 years from now, we are looking at seriously annexing these. Now we're stuck with
a bunch of deficiencies.
development that is not conforming to our city code.
That's correct.
And it's on us to bring it up to standard,
And
not
even,
the developer who profited from it
Well,
15
you
years
get,
prior.
you have a lot of leverage in that negotiation if these parcels need your services previous to annexation. So,
Previous annexation.
yeah,
So like Lulu Court,
we gave them water and sewer.
are they not annexed though? But they were held, they did do sidewalks, they did do curbs.
That was
So that was a successful.
that was a direct negotiation with the developer.
Okay. But that wasn't something that's in our code that was required. That was
It's kind of one-off.
the one-off where they agreed to develop consistent with city code.
Goodman, on the other hand, was annexed. And therefore developed to the same standard as the rest of city. Okay.
These are,
Goodman is just across.
Well,
if
and
you
that's
go
the benefit
Michigan
of,
Road to Woodland. It's that subdivision, pretty big lots with a lot of new homes on it, just on your way up to Schweitzer, on your left.
Like mechanic.
It's on the other side of the railroad tracks.
okay,
And then Lulu is just past Traverse Park underneath the railroad tracks, the court
On the
on the right there. That looks like a city subdivision, but it's not
Okay.
in the city.
thank
Because we're
you.
not contiguous to them. They would have annexed, but I believe Greg Taylor has a piece of property.
And Mike Roman.
between the two, and
Yeah.
unlikely November.
So you said this was going to be coming up. Timing?
It's in my
2 years ago.
strategic
Jeremy's
plan.
gonna talk
Okay.
about that in a little bit.
All right. Thank you.
It's been a long time coming.
So your other legislative responsibility is creation of urban renewal agency to plan and undertake economic development projects within specific areas of the city. I think you guys are familiar with that. You have urban renewal. You know that the creation of that is born out of council decision. I think you utilize urban renewal well here. You may have opportunities even to expand that at some point in the future, but that's not foreign to you. That's legislative decision making. And then authorizing and holding the executive sessions is legislative. So going into executive session, taking that vote is a legislative decision. And you're familiar with executive session. You've all been there now, you know, right?
And before you do that, I just wanna just retouch on, and she'll touch on this on the quasi judicial, but when we talk about ex parte contact, when.
Oh, we're
people-
gonna go into ex parte.
Oh, okay, awesome.
But you, I mean, say whatever, we'll read.
Well, just like that first bullet, adopt laws, health, safety and welfare. The best example I know of is if we had a no smoking inside law. You can have the tobacco lobbyist contact you and talk to you.
You can talk to anybody you want. on
You can have the
legislative.
anti-smoking people talk to you, and it's fine. You don't have to share that information with all of us, the public. There's no other party that needs to see what the other side's saying. So on legislative issues, you can have as much input, emails from people, as you want, so.
You can express your opinion.
You can express your opinion and not be at risk of being called biased. So keep this, I mean, kind of go back through this later and these
yeah.
bullet points, these are the areas where you can have
Okay.
contact and conversation with the public about these decisions. So remember though, when we talk about like subdivision, it's the adoption or amendment to a subdivision ordinance. You can have conversation with people about, not an application.
Right.
And so public health, safety and welfare, is there like a gray area? Is it about how you understand it, the meaning, the definition?
When you're creating laws on public health, safety and welfare.
I mean, when you're talking about it to people.
I'm
When
not
you're-
understanding your question.
If
Well,
it's site specific, if it's affecting an individual property, that's what I usually tell people is a
And-
bright line.
Yeah, and we're gonna get to that when we talk
Okay.
about quasi.
No.
Okay, next we'll kind of buzz through quickly your fiscal responsibilities. So these are all your responsibilities related to money. So your job is to prepare a budget outlining the city's projected revenues and expenditures. So these guys have been through the budget hearing process. You guys will go through it this year. Approve an appropriation ordinance establishing spending authority for specific funds or departments. So you have an appropriation ordinance already. So you have departments can spend up to a certain amount before those decisions have to come to you. You approve the city's property tax levy for the upcoming fiscal year. So when that comes in, you'll approve the levy. You'll decide on your budget hearing process whether or not you're going to take an additional percentage, you know, how that money is going to be spent. All of that goes into your budgeting process. You will receive actually reports from your city treasurer twice a month, plus all of your bills in great detail. So you see all of your finances. You have an obligation to approve those financial reports unless you have serious concerns. And I want to speak just for a moment on consent, only because it's not come up here, but it's come up elsewhere. You guys do a pretty good job of making sure your consent calendar really is just the routine business of the city. But if there's something on consent that you are concerned about, you need to make a request to move it into an action item, because you don't want to be put in a position where you have to deny a motion or disapprove a motion to approve consent, because then you're not approving the city's bills. And you need to be approving the bills and the payment of the bills specifically. So
Do you have to do that? When do you have to do that?
so
what
when
part
you
of the
see the
meeting?
agenda, you can always contact the mayor.
Okay.
It's his agenda, and make the request. If he chooses not to, you can do it at the beginning of a meeting.
At the very beginning.
Yeah, when he asks, are there any announcements
Okay.
from council or adjustments to the agenda?
So that happened at the last meeting.
And he always asks as well, it's in the script, he asks before approval of consent, are there any items council
Yeah,
wishes
I
to
missed
remove
that
from the
one.
consent calendar? We ask that every meeting.
Okay.
So consent is always listed, the items are listed in detail. It's always listed as an action item so that you have the ability to remove an item from consent to make it a separate action item. I will caution you, if you remove every item from consent and make it an action item, we will be here till midnight. So I would be very selective in and have a really good reason for wanting to do that. But you know, sometimes there are reasons you want to have a more robust discussion than just consent. Any questions on that? Okay.
I just mentioned for that edification, so we started the budgeting process. The way that works is Sarah and I work together with staff. We come up with the initial budget, and then we work through a variety of some statute required deadlines to bring that to the council. Council gets feedback. We'll talk about the budget. We'll talk about priorities and spending, and then by July, we end up adopting the budget as a city. So that process just started last week.
And it's a robust process. I mean, by the time it gets to you, there's been a lot of work that has gone into it, but you know, you should go through it in detail. You should ask any questions that you have. You should spend some time probably with Sarah and the budget, you know, the visual aspect of the budget or understanding that it's foreign to you. You don't want to go into a budget hearing and not be really confident in what you're.
You've spent so much time with Sarah.
Good. And she's
awesome.
she's awesome.
Yeah.
And she
And
knows
she's-
that stuff inside out and backwards.
She's happy to share.
Well, and I would say on that note, any one of us are willing to share and teach and educate and help any way that we can, any one of us at this table. So do not hesitate to contact us at any time with questions.
Fonda, is this appropriate time to touch, because it is a bit of a fiscal issue? Maybe it's under the executive powers, but it hasn't been a big problem yet, but in the past it has been council engagement with staff in terms of time and
Yeah,
mayors. Is this a good segue? And
Yeah.
let the record show Councilman Dick has
Yeah,
arrived.
sorry,
Oh,
everybody.
you're fine.
and you know, that's kind of it can be more of a policy driven process per governmental entity. So maybe this would be a good time if you want to speak to sort of what your vision is
Yeah.
for interacting with staff.
Sure. I you all know I used to be a staff member. So it can be, put staff in a difficult position because, staff naturally wants to serve everyone well. And when you have individual council members asking staff for time or information, they can put, you can't serve two masters. Staff can feel like, oh, I work for the mayor, he can fire me or she can fire me, but I also sit in front of a council who I want good favor with. So it's this balance, and like I said, it hasn't been an issue to date, but when I was a department head, the mayor, Ray Miller, said we had one councilwoman who would, demand significant research, like I want this, 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 and this, the day before a council meeting. And it's like, oh my gosh, what do I do? So the mayor at the time said, if it's more than 10 minutes, the council member has to go to the mayor and ask for the mayor's approval to allocate staff time to that need. I don't want to get that nitpicky with everyone. So I'll just put it out there and say, if your request is more than like 10 minutes, just recognize that staff has directives from myself, from their supervisors, and that although they love and respect you, they also have a job to do and have accountability on that job. So if it's going to be more than 10 or 15 minutes, just work with me so we can carve out time and let me make sure that they don't have other priorities on their plate to deal with. So I'd rather keep it pretty casual unless there's a challenge.
And just so you know, our process too is if you send us a question that that is a legal question that needs a response, we'll likely respond we'll respond to all of council and the mayor, not just to you. If I'm questioning whether or not it's actually a legal question or it could be answered better elsewhere, I'll forward it to Jeremy and say, what do you want me to do with this? Do you want to answer it? Do you want me to? How do you want to handle this? He has the ultimate discretion to decide how your legal resources are spent, which is a little different than staff, but just so you know, that's our process. So he gives us the authority on the matters that we need to follow up on.
Just go ahead, man.
I'm just gonna say, and I understand that's billed differently to the city.
No, it's all billed to the city.
Because I wanted to talk to you that one time. And you said out of the council time, it would have been a charge extra to the city.
If you and I have a conversation privately, I'm gonna bill the city for that time.
Okay. Yeah. And so.
Same with me.
Well, that's what I'm asking.
Oh.
Well,
yeah, we bill the
city. If we're doing city business.
Yeah.
We're gonna bill for it.
Yeah.
Now, if you call me about your trust, I'm gonna bill you separately. Or your boundary line dispute with your neighbor, I'm gonna bill you separately. But if you are at anything, if you are asking us a question as a council member, we have an obligation to bill the city for that. Because we have to make sure we don't work for any council person individually, even though we want to answer all of your individual questions, we work for you collectively.
And so it's a contract with the city, I guess.
Yeah, and generally, and I may have it wrong, but they represent us at meetings for a monthly fee. And then we have two other categories. One is like specific legal investigation or opinions, and then there's litigation or.
And that's why you gave me a minute ahead of the council meeting to clarify.
Because we're just that when we're here for council, we're just billing for the amount of time that we're.
And I didn't want extra billing.
Well, and what we do on our bill, I mean, you guys have seen it. What we do is we have for the city of Sandpoint said, we'll give you 20 hours a month for $3,000. So essentially that's $150 an hour instead of our regular hourly rate. Everything over those 20 hours, so we take the first 20 hours and that's a flat fee. Everything over those 20 hours then is billed at $200. And just so you know, we've not raised you. Our other rates across the board at every other governmental entity is $225 an hour for everything. There's no flat fee. There's no discount. It's $225 an hour for everything. And our regular hourly rates in the private sector are $300 to $350. So just so you kind of have an idea of scale of that is our governmental rate. And you may in the future see a contract come from us that's $225 across the board just because it's easier to calculate. So,
but I would just say, I mean, think about it. My interpretation of that is, if I have a legitimate legal question, I'm not going to be like, oh, I don't want to incur $50 of taxpayer cost to get that question answered. my mindset is, if
Give
I
an
don't have a good
answer.
answer to that question, I'm gonna incur possibly even higher costs by making a bad decision, not informed by legal counsel.
Or saying something dumb from the
don't,
dais. that
I mean,
gets
I know
us in
you're
trouble.
concerned about like saving the city money, and if you ask Zach a question, it might cost us $50 because it takes him 15 minutes to answer it. But it's also really important that you know the right legal opinions.
Absolutely.
So, you know, fiscal responsibility is important,
Alright.
but think about it. We're paying $3,000 a month for our base rate.
Okay.
Now, if we were employing a city attorney who could answer your question for free, it's not free either. He's also charging $200 an hour. So if he takes an hour of his time to answer your question, it's still costing taxpayers money. It's not free just because
It
he's
was
on
a quick
staff.
minute question.
It was a
And
quick question.
and
It
it
was
was answered.
perfectly appropriate. And that's
Had a
why
good
I
time.
say, if one of you asked a question that we're like, oh yeah, everybody could benefit from that, we're gonna respond to everybody. Because you should all have the benefit of the answer.
Fonda has quite often said, oh, 3 people have already called me about that same exact thing, though.
Yeah,
So,
I appreciate it when
You
you
know.
reply to everybody.
yeah. So
And that reply to everyone, so you did.
No, that was all.
Also goes, and Fonda and Zach can expand, when you're getting a question or a response, we should be copying everyone,
Okay, well,
to some degree. Not on decision making.
I always say, when we're sending the communication, it 100% is protected by attorney-client privilege. If one of you if one of you hits reply all to that question, I can't guarantee it's going to be protected, even if we're CC'd on the email. So if you're communicating amongst each other, if the mayor sends out a communication to all of you and we're not on it and you hit reply all, that is potentially deliberations, potentially a violation of the open meeting law.
That's what I thought.
That is, I mean, that's problematic. So I always say I'm gonna remove the reply all button from every council member's keyboard
Well, blind copy is your friend.
until it's not.
I mean, for basic things.
For basic things, yeah.
Because that's what I thought and think, I asked you that one time.
Yeah,
If
and
I reply to all, is that all of us talking? And that's,
towards a
meeting.
deliberation or towards a decision. And maybe Melissa, I know you mentioned it once when you were, and I don't remember the context, when we said, when the council members reply, they should copy others. Do you recollect what that was?
Well, it was kind of what Fonda does. It's so that, if there is a question posed even to staff, and like if, for instance, for me, if I get a question from a council member and I think, oh, actually everybody could benefit from this, I'm gonna send it out to everybody.
But that's not an invitation for any one of you then to hit reply all and
right.
engage in
Which is why I
conversation.
blind copy always. You'll never see me not blind copy council. It's not because I'm trying to hide anything.
Right.
That removes the reply all option.
Oh, it does?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's your,
That's why you said
that's the review.
Now I know why it's your friend, because I'm only thinking from the context of IT pulls it for a public records request and it's all still there and
It
blah, blah, blah.
removes the option.
Oh,
And then I always try to remember to put at the bottom, in case anybody wonders, I say, council was blind copied on this because they're gonna get it, and I go, well, it's got this. And usually I'll put staff in the CC.
got it. That makes
Put
sense.
Jeremy in the 2, and then I'll blind copy council, and I'll make a note at the bottom of the message. Council was blind copied on this message, so you all know that everybody received it, but you have no ability to hit reply all and create a meeting.
And I
That's what I
just wanted to add a comment, probably for people that are new, like text messages between council
Oh,
members and the number of council members. You can't do group texts about anything, just don't do that stuff. And that's come up sometimes, and I've told Fonda, I'm like, and I just immediately delete myself out of there because I don't want anything to do with that. So
And those are all public records.
they're
right?
all public records, doesn't matter if it's private email or your private phone.
Yep,
all
that's
of
why I
it's
have 2
public.
phones. This one is the city phone. Anyone can have it, can go to the newspaper, anything can be printed on it. Nothing on that I wouldn't want on the front page of paper.
and I
This
only
one?
did that as a resident to all of you.
Yeah.
I had not done
Your
that.
private phone and Fonda can expand at the right time, discoverable.
Yeah, they can
Yes.
still go for your private phone.
So, texting, phone calls and faxes are great.
Yeah, the only record you'll have from a phone call is who you called and when and how long you spoke to them. We'll infer from that too, but at least it's less than text messages. And that's not just group text either, it's individual text, and this gets to the root of, and this is being looked at through a pretty good microscope right now by certain interest groups. It's the definition of deliberation. So we have this kind of misconception that deliberation is only what you're doing on the dais when you have an action before you and you're trying to develop consensus. The actual definition of deliberation is any communication that you have or any information that you receive at any time that helps you make the ultimate decision. So any conversation you even may have one-on-one ahead of a decision is considered a deliberation. And it is a violation of the open meeting law to deliberate outside of public observation. So that's why you just can't have those conversations that help you make an ultimate decision that can be defined as a deliberation without
With
violating.
council members.
Yes, with council members. Yeah, deliberation only happens amongst council members.
And my communication with the council, I can give them information.
That's correct.
I'm sorry, what was that?
My communication with you, any of you, I can give you information and answer questions you may have.
Okay, that's not deliberation.
It could be,
Oh.
it could be problematic if at the end of the day, he has to be a tiebreaker vote,
Okay,
but those are such rare circumstances. And generally that's going to be something that is contentious or sensitive or already high conflict. And we know that, and we're going to be navigating the process so carefully and kind of walking you through it step by step. So.
and my questions are usually just clarification and
Right.
Discussion.
Where did we land? So your responsibility, we kind of got off track. That's okay. We can go in whatever order we want. That's the beauty of this. Fiscal responsibilities, examine quarterly the accounts of officers responsible for managing money, provide for audits. So you'll have requests come before you for audit companies to be hired to do audits. Established by ordinance the place of deposit for city funds. You'll have ordinance come in front of you if you know the mayor decides we need to change banks or we need to make an adjustment to where we deposit our city funds. Sarah says we can get a better interest rate here. You'll see that from time to time. And then approved by resolution investment of any city fund. So all of those responsibilities are your financial responsibilities. Okay. The next is the fun one. We've kind of danced around this a little bit. Quasi judicial hearing. So you are literally sitting as a judge. Pretend you have a black robe on. Rezones, conditional use permits, variances, subdivision, preliminary plats, your final plats come before you, not as a public hearing. So that's why it says preliminary plats. These applications and these hearings are dealing with the specific rights of individuals. So individual property owner rights. That's the reason you're sitting as a judge. Your decision affects somebody's personal property rights. You are obligated to provide due process. So due process means that they have a right to know what the rules are. They have a right to hear what all of the responses back to their application is, what any of the objections are, and they have a right to respond. So they have a right to have a process that is fair and impartial, and the hearings must be free from conflicts of interest, bias, and explicit communication. So we'll go through conflicts of interest, the definition, bias, and ex parte, but let's park for just a minute on fair and impartial. So when you are an elected council member, I hate to say this, but I'll say it anyways, you lose your ability to be a private citizen public commenter on land use application. Specifically.
Sorry to interrupt. On land use applications. Correct. Specifically.
Yeah, on anything that's a quasi judicial hearing.
Okay.
Or any philosophical belief you may have regarding people's rights to do whatever you think they should be able to do with their property. Mm-hmm. So you no longer can be posting on Facebook, I am anti-growth. You no longer can be quoted in the newspaper or the reader as saying, I don't want to see development anywhere in our city, or I want expansive development. Everybody should be able to, whatever your opinions are related to growth and density and the use of private property needs to stay to yourself. And here's why. When you put that information out there in the public, the statutory right of the applicant in having a fair and impartial hearing becomes really important. And they can go and pull all of those public comments, and they can come in here and they can say, I want an independent hearing examiner. And I want an independent hearing examiner because I don't believe that I can get a fair and impartial hearing here based on what X so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so have posted in their public forum. They're already biased. They already have an opinion formulated. I cannot get a fair hearing, so I don't want these decision makers making this decision for me. Or worse, they pick on Deb. I'm just making this up. They come in and say, Deb Rule needs to recuse herself from this application and from this hearing process because she's made it very clear what her opinion is regarding land use in the city. And she cannot provide for me an impartial hearing. So I want to formally request that she recuse herself. As you can imagine, if that all happens in a public meeting process, that is very uncomfortable and difficult to deal with. Not only is it because they're not going to tell us ahead of time, they're going to put Deb on the spot and she's going to get defensive and I'm going to have to immediately fly into interrogation mode of figuring out whether or not Deb can be fair and unbiased, and or erring on the side of caution and saying, Deb, there's enough evidence here that I think you need to recuse yourself. So you were elected to vote. That is your job. Your constituents elected you so that you could be a decision maker on that dais. So this is a warning to keep yourself available to make decisions and not do things that could jeopardize your ability to make decisions, to include being too vocal about what your opinion might be regarding land use, specifically because of the due process rights of every applicant in the city. Now we can park there and you can ask me any questions you want. Yes.
Quick question, because something came up recently in another body, where, a board member didn't want to vote. And this board member had no bias, had no ex parte. They announced at the beginning of the meeting that they did not.
They have an obligation to vote.
And that is how they were advised by staff. So just so you know, just because you don't want to weigh in, you're obligated to vote.
I had just recently had a council member in another city who, it was a very difficult decision. We only have 4 council members. 2 had to recuse themselves because they had been actively lobbying against this project. And this one council member did not want to vote because it was so contentious and she didn't want to be in the spotlight. And I said, we walked through the whole exercise of, have you had ex parte communication? Have you expressed your opinion publicly anywhere? I mean, and I said, you were elected to vote. That is your job. You have to vote.
Is present a vote? Or does it have to be yes or no? Present is not a vote.
No.
That's abstain, basically.
Yeah.
One of the things, observation, frustration from when I was on the private side. So these quasi judicial hearings, it's a impartial jury. And you have your public hearing, applicant, public, rebuttal, staff comments. And more than one time I've seen, and both as a planning director, as a project rep, somebody pull up on council a statement. I'm moved to deny based on da 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 da. And as the applicant's rep, you're like, if you're impartial and you're listening to all the evidence, how is it possible that you had this whole statement written out with all of your response to deny when you hadn't even done
sometimes those are prepared for us by Melissa.
I think Jeremy's referring to something different, not the samples that were given,
but the actual findings that somebody puts in the record.
We're trying to
you can't show up to the meeting with those, but I've in the past taken notes during the meeting of the reasons I'm denying.
That's exactly
right. And I've got the language from Melissa, and then I've got my 3 justifications in front of me. So it could sound like I had it scripted, but I really just wrote it during the meeting.
The other thing I'd say is you could ahead of time write one of each, and then say that. Say just so you all know, I'm going to read, but I had prepared one of each. I hadn't made my mind up before I got here. I needed to hear the evidence, but I had prepared one of each just in case so that I wouldn't bumble my way through. You absolutely can do that.
Yeah, that would be good. But
you're not prohibited from thinking about it.
Right.
prior to the hearing.
Yeah, and I love that solution.
But you have to come open to either decision.
Yeah, and legally, you have to use the information presented at the hearing
Yeah.
and only the information presented at the hearing to make your decision.
Right, witness what Jeremy's witnessed,
And-
and gets pulled out.
And trust me, we're just sitting there going, yeah.
And perception
Oh.
is from the public perception, it's like, unless you say, hey, you know, I'm gonna read something here, I weighed this, you know, here's my two pros and cons, I'm gonna read off one. That's better, at least you understand, oh, there's two up there, but when somebody just, and it happens at other towns too, where someone whips out and it's like, I'm gonna deny all, it's like, did you even hear what was presented? So just more of an FYI, that's to make things, and I'll try to do a good job. We haven't had a quasi judicial item yet, but I'll try to do a really good job. This guy named John O'Hara, he was on council, some of you may know him, he was the best ever. He would go down one way and say, based on, so findings of facts, conclusions of law. That's where after the presentation, you're sort of deliberating, discussing, to have robust findings of facts and conclusions of law based on what you've heard and what's in the record. This is what we want to get to. It's like, can you say, you know, this is what I heard, this is why. And John O'Hara would go down one road and say, on one hand, I heard this, and you're like, oh gosh, you're going to make that decision. But then he'd say, but in weighing that, this is what I also heard, this, and this, and therefore that's why I'm voting this way. And it was just awesome. It was like the tightest.
And I'll tell you, your staff struggles sometimes at trying to pluck the findings of fact and conclusions of law out of the things you say in deliberation, because very rarely do we get a super, once in a while, clean motion that lays it all out. So be cognizant of that. The obligation in the code is for there to be findings of fact and conclusions of law related to your decision, and they have to apply to your standards of approval. So a finding of fact isn't, I drive that intersection every day and I hate the fact it takes me 3 minutes to get through. One, you just put that fact in the record outside of the hearing process. You probably didn't hear that from anybody anywhere along the way, so don't do that. But number two, you have to make findings that apply to the actual standards of approval in front of you. You guys haven't had one yet. Go back and watch some planning and zoning or some other council hearings, but your staff, the person who's directing the process, will put the standards of approval up on the big screen for you. You need to say, these are the facts that support this standard. These are the facts that support this standard. So their quasi-judicial hearings are difficult. They're nothing to rush through, and especially not your deliberations and your decisions. And like Jeremy indicated at the beginning, there are highest place for liability, and they are not covered by your insurance company.
Now, the good news is if an applicant's agreed, there's an appeal process.
Mm-hmm.
They can come back to us, reconsideration.
And we're going to talk about that.
And then if it does go to the courts for judicial determination, frequently the courts will just say, you made a bad decision, you're finding out facts. This happens to Bonner County like every month. I'm exaggerating. Sorry, Bonner County. They'll just kick it back to the entity and say, do it again, make better findings of facts, more robust conclusions of law, and redo.
In fact, most times the court's only remedy is just to kick it back to the entity and to make those decisions. That doesn't make it, I mean, it's still quite expensive to get to a judicial decision, so you want to avoid that, but.
The opposite can happen too, though, where we approve an application and the community appeals it.
Only affected parties can appeal.
Right, neighbors, is that 300 feet rule? Yeah.
Yes, but that is true. You can have an affected party that appeals.
My comment would be that if you're concerned about what you're saying or you're nervous during the quasi judicial, just make eye contact with Fonda the whole time. She's just gonna let you know if you're getting in a gray area. You'll be able to tell by the expression on her face. So it's not that hard. So if you're gonna say something or you're making the motion, you just eye contact Fonda the whole way through it, and you'll know where you might be.
The best thing that the Zoom era did for me through COVID, because I mediated cases via Zoom where my face was on the screen all day long, was made me acutely aware of my facial expressions and which ones say what. So remember, my face isn't on the camera, so
unless you're talking,
unless I'm speaking. If I'm speaking, my face is, but that's correct.
That brings up two other questions. questions, a comment on question one. Zoom, it's really an interesting thing. This is where I'd like us to go because there's due process. Opponents and applicants have the right to hear all evidence and respond to it on the record. If somebody's on Zoom and for some reason they something happens on their internet connection and maybe they live next door but they're attending this hearing on Zoom, it's a concern of mine that what happens if they claim they didn't hear something or they couldn't interface. So I'd like to maybe go away from Zoom from participation, Zoom watch only, unless it's a scheduled presenter, because the city's small enough that anyone who has an issue should be able to come here and make a public presentation. The county, it's a little different, and they have a disclaimer up there on their Zoom. If you have to drive 2 hours from the county, from Upper Priest to come to a hearing, sure, Zoom works well. It's a benefit. But I have concerns, and I haven't talked to Fonda or Zach about it, about if somebody were disrupted on Zoom, would we have to renotice and redo a whole hearing if they made a claim that they didn't have due process because of that? So
the answer to that is yes. And you would not be the only city that has moved towards affected parties and applicants need to be in person.
Okay.
So commenters, if they wished, could be on Zoom still if you want to provide that, but you don't have to. Other cities have moved back to in person only. The other reason for that is, and we're going to get to it here in a minute, is the transcribable verbatim record is very difficult. It's difficult enough in person. It's a additional complicating factor if you have parties on Zoom.
Okay, great.
I'd just like to throw out there that if we decide to move something like that, I think we still need something in there that would make accommodations for somebody with some type of disability.
We absolutely have to do that.
Right,
yes,
exactly.
Yes.
But I just want to point that out as you're making that note, that there may be some people that for whatever reason that would be, especially affected parties in the surrounding area.
Yeah, we would still be required to make accommodations for anybody with disabilities.
And then my comment is, so privately, I do probably between 30 and 40 quasi-judicial hearings representing clients in 9 different communities a year. So I'm going to work really hard to make sure you guys have good findings of facts, conclusions of law, and work as a team with Fonda and Zach so if I seem a little bit leading or odd during these meetings saying, Councilman Schreiber, did you hear anything else that would, support, this? That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to draw it out of you so there's a really good statement of conclusions and findings of facts. So you'll see me maybe a little more probing during your deliberations in that motion.
And all of this speaks to just the real importance, especially on these quasi-judicial. I mean, your job is important no matter what, but it's really important to do your homework. Watch the planning and zoning hearing or meeting, listen to the questions that were asked there, listen to the comment that was provided there. Listen, you have a tremendous planning and zoning commission that does a really thorough job. They're going to spoon feed you a lot of your findings and fact and conclusions of law should it continue the same way through council. But it's really important to read all of your materials, ask questions about the staff report if you don't understand something, and then watch or listen to that planning and zoning meeting.
Your bullet point says primary topics include land use. Are there secondary topics besides land use that we might see judicial or quasi-judicial hearings on?
Where did I say primary?
Second to last bullet point.
No.
Just land use.
It's gonna be land use.
Okay.
Yeah, I was trying to think. Rezones, conditional use permits, area.
It's all land use.
Yeah, it's gonna be land use. Probably because at the top I said deals with specific rights of individuals, but then it's going to be land use related for those individuals. So notice an opportunity to be heard. We've talked about that. The applicant has a right to be heard and to respond to everything that's brought up in the public hearing process. It's land use related. Comments all need to come in during the hearing. No ex parte communication. So this is one of those areas where you cannot talk to the public. Period. End of story. Cannot
And so
talk to each other.
Like, I think you said if somebody emails you something,
You forward that to Melissa immediately.
what if you don't know it's about a land use
Well,
issue?
the
until
second you know,
Okay,
you respond to them and say, thank you, I'll be forwarding this to the city clerk immediately, just so they know you got it and they don't email you again, and you send it to Melissa.
And disclose it.
And, yeah,
And another example that is unlikely, but does happen. You pick up your voicemail, a strange numbers
Oh,
left your
yeah.
voicemail. And says, hey Pam, I just wanted you to know there's Indian artifacts on that property and there's radioactive waste. Don't approve that subdivision. Okay, you've now heard that, so how do you get that into the record? So that we all know it and that the applicant gets to rebut this evidence. So in that case, what?
send an
Okay.
email to Melissa that says, or forward the voicemail. I mean, our technological capabilities anymore are just to forward that voicemail to the appropriate person. And then, as Zach said, you disclose it. So when it comes time for the hearing, when the mayor asks, has anybody had any ex parte communication, or do they have any conflict of interest on this matter? You're going to say, I received an email from so-and-so and I forwarded it immediately to Melissa. And I will ask you, does that preclude you from being fair or impartial? Are you biased in any way? I'll ask you a series of questions to secure that you still have the ability to be a decision maker.
could you quickly share that 300 feet thing again?
Yeah, so affected parties that have the right to appeal a land use decision are those property owners within 300 feet of the applicants all the way around. And so I will have council members or planning and zoning commissioners say, what do we do when people come and make public comment, but they don't live anywhere near the project site? So we talk about the weight that you give different evidence, and judges have to do this all the time. So that weight is going to be by scale. You're going to be evaluating, are they an actual affected person? Probably going to give them a bit of weight. As long as what they're talking about, and we'll get to this in a minute, is pertinent to the standards of approval. So they come and say a lot of things that have nothing to do with the standards of approval. We'll get to that. But are they an affected party? Or do they drive this route? Usually you'll have people who say, I don't live nearby, but I drive this route every day. So is this particular application affecting somebody's traffic, or do they use a park in the area, something like that, versus the people who just come and complain about everything that are not affected by legal definition or by practicality in any way.
My favorite one is, I believe it was Joel, got an email from somebody who lives in France.
That's perfect. That's a perfect
Must have
example.
visited.
Was it on a land
I
use?
don't even remember what it
Yeah,
was,
I was
but I
gonna
just
say.
remember, and I'm like, oh, really? Yeah,
Excellent.
that makes a difference.
Excellent.
And another just quickly thing on quasi judicial, so we have a requirement for opponents or anyone who wants to put something to the record, one page basically, unless it's 5 or 7 days in advance. There's all sorts of ways that people can leverage this process as an applicant's rep or as an opponent. One of the things you could do is you could dump a 300-page study the day before the hearing into the record and say, okay, great, that's part of the record now, related to something or the property. And then during the hearing, if you make a decision, that person can say, well, you didn't review the evidence in the record. How could you make a decision? There's at 300 pages, there's artifacts and radioactive waste or whatever it may be. So we limit that to 1 page, so that coming up to the hearing date, there's a reasonable understanding that you can digest that information.
Is that written somewhere for those?
It's in our policy.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's why if somebody wants to submit something lengthy and really profound about an application, we ask if it's more than a page that you submit that far enough in advance so we can at least, with Fonda and Zach, determine whether it's valid and worth consideration and so on.
Okay, so somebody can submit more than that.
Yeah.
They just have to do it in a certain period of time.
Yeah.
Okay.
And on those decisions, correct me if I'm wrong, you can vote to approve, you can vote to deny, you can vote to, I used to tell people, if you've heard a lot of information tonight, You don't have to make a decision tonight. Our only obligation on these is to hold the public hearing that night when we advertise it. So if you hear a lot, you could potentially say, I've heard a lot tonight. I need to sleep on this. I need to digest what I've heard. I move to continue this to a time certain, either to make a decision or hear more information about something that you need more detail on. And then we would reopen the hearing for just that very narrow piece of information you need more information on.
So you could table it on the information you have and the hearing remains closed, and then just digest and then take it off the table at the next meeting for decision making. Or like Jeremy indicated, you can, you would make a motion to, because the hearing would be closed at that point, you make a motion to hold a second public hearing on a narrow issue related to whatever information you want, that then becomes a part of the record. The reason that it is another public hearing is the applicant has a right to respond to whatever additional information comes in.
And the thought is that by saying we're continuing to a time certain, the affected parties, the applicant are all in the room. They know that, oh, this is going to continue at this time and place, and it avoids us having to notice things to some degree as well.
You wouldn't have to notice that if we were for the public.
Not if we table it. Well, if you are going to have additional evidence come into the record, yes. If you're just table, yes, you have to republish. If you're tabling to a date certain to continue the deliberations and decision, no. It's just your regular agenda.
Only for reopening.
Only for reopening the public hearing. But even that night, I mean, we could say, in order to have enough time, this public hearing can't be until
It's 21 days out.
Yeah. So we go 2 council meetings essentially.
Right.
So don't ever feel pressured that you have to make a decision that night. If you've heard a lot, totally fine to say, I've heard a lot. I need to sleep on this, closing the public hearing. We're going to deliberate this to on a certain date or at our next meeting or whatever it may be. So we have basically 3. And I guess the fourth option is to deny and remand it back to planning commission for additional information or consideration.
What's a scenario where you would do that?
Maybe there's a lot of concern about how the traffic is going to impact a neighborhood. And the applicant said, oh, we'll do a traffic impact study. And well, we've got 2 like this, right? Well, we could have 2 out there like this. Where the applicant said, we'll do whatever the traffic impact study says, and it's all going to be fine. But you haven't actually seen the traffic impact study. You could send it back and say, we actually need to see the results of the traffic impact study to see what the actual impact is going to be. Sure, you've said you're going to address it, but I need to know what those impacts are. Is it going to be more turn lanes? Is it going to affect our transportation plan? Is it going to affect state highways? So
I will, that's a great example. It needs to be information that is derived from either from expert opinion. So traffic is a perfect example of that. It can't be, I'm assuming that there might be some impact that you just make up, or that the worst part is we have very educated council members who are really smart and know a lot, but then want to impose their own professional expertise onto the decision. You can't do that. You can only make a decision based on what is in the record in front of you, and or ask for expert information to be provided to you from an outside source. You cannot impose your own expert knowledge, unfortunately, into the record or onto your decision.
Here's another wild example. If you wanted to throw gravel on the gears of a project, you could, as a opponent, you could go find some arrowheads, for example, at a store made in 2024, throw them on the edge of the site, and on the site, take a picture and say, this is a former cultural, site. There needs to be an archaeological study done. That, I mean, it's far flung, but you say, wow, maybe this is like the burial grounds of a significant cultural significance, and we need to actually have an archaeological study done.
And at that point, the council wouldn't have any choice but to deny it and remand it back, right?
Well, we're going to talk about some of your decision making. There is a code section that requires, if you are going to deny an application, you have to tell the applicant how they can be successful if there's a path forward. So we're going to get to that in a minute, which council members don't like. Okay, let's buzz, because we're
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Could we take just a brief?
Sure.
That'd be great.
Good.
5-minute break. Convening the council training and workshop or working session. Back to city attorneys. So
We're gonna talk, next slide, please. Conflict of interest is defined in Idaho Code Section 67-6506. So remember, I said that your quasi judicial hearings have due process rights, and your hearing is to not include anybody that has a conflict of interest. That also can be in your legislative decisions. So you can't be receiving any financial benefit at all from the decision that is being made. And if you or your family is your household, I would say, it says within the second degree of consanguinity, which I hate that word, just so you know, that's like second degree of your family. So if your household, your kid, your spouse, your
Relatives.
yeah, relatives, well, we can go into relatives, but just
Closer.
yeah.
Okay.
do that way.
Parents, if you're gonna receive any financial benefit, you cannot participate in the action.
So that would include, for example, if a fire district commissioner's child worked for the fire district.
If the fire and the child lived at home and it could benefit the household in any way.
Okay, but if the child was an adult that didn't live at home,
Right.
that might be okay.
We might have to look at that just depending on the circumstances, but there could be, I mean, that's a close enough relation. We'd want to evaluate whether or not there is a conflict of interest. That's a good question.
That's the one that's right there on the line.
Yep. I guess if no, we won't go there. I was gonna say, if the child has a life insurance policy paid for by the fire that benefits the parents, any decision related to employment.
And what's your preferred process? If we think we may have I know with EAC that I sit on, we bring it to the Attorney General and he clears it. Do we bring this to you preemptively and say,
yes.
Here's the situation, or at the meeting?
Ahead of time.
Okay.
We never want to be unpacking this question for the first time in a public meeting. So if you think you have a conflict of interest, ask us about it. We'll walk through the process. Maybe there would likely be a disclosure required if the question was asked. We would say, you know, we thought so-and-so had a conflict. You, the council member or mayor, would disclose to the public, I was concerned about perception. I've walked through this with legal counsel. Here's my relationship. We've determined there is not a legal conflict of interest.
And this is all financial benefit related.
Financial benefit. Yeah. Yeah, it says, shall not participate in any proceeding or action when a member or employee or his employer, blah, 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 has an economic interest in the procedure or action. So economic interest in any way. And I'll note at the bottom, if you participate and it's determined you have a conflict of interest, if you did it knowingly, the violation of this section shall be a misdemeanor. So if we find out about it, we have no choice but to disclose or report. Next is bias. So as we've indicated, Bonner County's given us some good resources in defining things. So there's a case, Bonner County case from 2004, where bias was defined, but it is parties appearing in a quasi-judicial matter are entitled to unbiased decision makers. And so pre-hearing statements by a decision maker, this is what we were talking about earlier, are fatal to the validity of the zoning determination if the statements show that the decision maker, 1, has made up his or her mind regarding the facts and will not listen to the evidence with an open mind, or B, 2, will not apply existing law, or, and these are ors, not and, or 3, has already made up his or her mind regarding the outcome of the hearing. That speaks directly to Jeremy's example of reading a predetermined decision, something you wrote before you got here, before you heard the evidence at the public hearing. And biased decision makers are barred from participating in land use applications to protect the process. So if you think that you might have done something that would create bias, you're going to talk to us ahead of time. We're going to walk through this. We're going to make a public disclosure one way or the other. If you cannot participate in the vote in any way, you recuse yourself from that action and you physically get up and leave the dais and come to the back of the room. A lot of people ask me, why do we have to leave the dais? Well, because you can't influence the deliberations in any way. And sometimes your facial expressions, your snorts, your snots, your slamming the table, your movement, your crossing your arms, your body language in any way can affect the deliberations. So you need to come to the back of the room and probably look out the window facing or something. If you can't, just be still. Next is ex parte communication. So a quasi judicial officer must confine his or her decision to the record produced at the hearing. We've talked about this quite a bit today. Any ex parte communication must be disclosed at the public hearing, including a general description of the communication. Again, the purpose of the disclosure is to afford opposing parties an opportunity to rebut whatever was said to you. And ex parte communications may prevent the continued participation in a hearing. So we would walk through whether or not that ex parte communication is detrimental to your ability to continue as a decision maker. We've talked about this a bit, but here's just a straight up bullet point list of your role as a council member at a quasi judicial hearing. You're to listen to the testimony, read the staff report, reach out to staff ahead of time with any questions. And I'll say it again here. The purpose of asking staff questions is not to ask those questions in secret and keep that information from the public. The purpose is so that the staff can be prepared with the answers at the time of the public hearing, and we have a better record and we have a better presentation to the public. So whatever questions you ask staff ahead of time, you may very well ask at the public hearing as well. We just get to give the public a better presentation of the information because staff is prepared to answer. So I've had council members say before, well, reaching out to staff just means then that we're asking all these questions in secret. That is not the point. It is to help you have actual appropriate information and to have staff have time to give thorough responses.
And I've said to staff, just for you guys, I'll, email or I'll make a short call and I'll be like, I'm going to ask this question up on council. So I don't even wait for the reply or understanding. I just let them know. I don't feel like this is clear. So this is what I'm going to ask, but I want to do it in the public. So
that's perfect. Ask questions during testimony. That doesn't mean the public comment testimony. That means staff presentation and the applicant's presentation. And I will say here, a lot of times there are questions, and if you ask them to us ahead of time, we'll tell you this, questions that need to be directed to the applicant instead of staff. And I think probably one of the biggest concerns that I have during a public hearing is when the questions are asked of staff that should be directed at the applicant. And again, like Deb said, if you look at me, I'll give you the indication of let's ask the applicant that question, whether it's during their presentation or it's during rebuttal. It is not staff's job to advocate for a project or an application. They are just giving you the information. They're just telling you what the application is. They are telling you how it meets your code. They are telling you whether or not they believe it to be inconsistent anywhere with your comprehensive plan. They're not advocating for a project. And I do feel like there have been times where council members have made our staff feel like they need to be on the defense, or that they put staff in a position where they're defensive. They're not advocating for a project. They're just giving you the information so you can make a decision. So sometimes, that's why I say sometimes your questions are more appropriately suited to the applicant. Make them defend their project.
So one thing that I learned over time was that there are development and planning and zoning related issues that can be administratively approved.
Yes.
And when an applicant comes forth with a project that can be administratively approved, we will not hear that, right?
That's correct.
But if there's a project that can be brought forth that requires this public hearing process, staff is not like the representative of the client in that regard. They're presenting the facts, and the staff may have their own opinions, right? But they're not going to express those opinions towards this project in the public forum.
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad you brought up the administrative process, because that kind of segues me to other quasi-judicial hearings that you might get different from what we had on the list before. if there is a staff determination that ends up appealed to council. So you can't be involved in any ex parte communication regarding any land use application anywhere in the city, because there's a potential for it to be appealed, which then would come to you in the form of a quasi judicial hearing. This is where Jeremy's dancing a delicate line by being city administrator. And we've talked about this, so this is not a secret. Acting city administrator and mayor at the same time, because there are a number of administrative decisions that as the mayor slash city administrator, he needs to have knowledge about, but he can't have so much knowledge that it prevents him from being a decision maker on the dais if you guys end up in a split vote. So he's walking a super fine line of maintaining his ability to be a tiebreaker while still being the CEO of the city, if you will. And it's tough.
The only thing I would add to that is, so ask a question during testimony. So the applicant's up there giving their pitch. It's really frustrating when an elected official gives us an opinion to
Agreed.
you. Or just, I'll often say, is there a question? They'll go on a rant and say, you know, this development's this, or it's not, or it is. And I'll say, is there a question? Because that's really the applicant's role up there, is to answer your questions and for you to get more information. So just keep that in mind, that again, opinions, I think we've talked about it aren't there, but.
And that's a great point. Those statements of opinion or statements regarding anything are not appropriate during the public hearing at any time. That is just questions. You have deliberations for expressing your opinion and your statements and what you think about a project and what you think about anything related to the project. Don't deliberate during the public hearing. I'm gonna say that again. Do not deliberate during the public hearing.
Can you clarify on that? Do not deliberate during the public hearing, but once the public hearing is wrapped up, there's a period of deliberation.
When it closes.
When it closes, yeah.
So you have a period where the public hearing is open.
Yeah.
And then once the mayor says the public hearing is now closed, that's your cue for deliberations and statements and opinions. And
can we talk backing up to like the process? Let's say there's a preliminary plat for a subdivision that's coming to council for approval or denial. Presumably, our planning staff has spent hours with that private developer to make sure that this preliminary plat is in conformance with city code, right? But can an application make it through that process and still have kind of like blatantly non-conforming elements to it that the developer has just ignored the advice of staff?
That is correct.
Is it staff's responsibility to point out where this application is not in conformance with city code?
They do.
Or do we have to dig in and say, I think there's some conflict here?
Your staff report will say where it's not in compliance with city code.
So in those situations, like it's our taking a side on that is not our expressing our opinion. It's our making a finding based on fact that they are not conforming with city code.
Well, the best way to approach it is when your city staff is presenting, you say, I just want to clarify, did I read the staff report correctly that this application is not in compliance with city code in this area?
Right.
That is correct.
And that is not staff expressing their opinion, right? That is staff saying, look, there are not enough bike parking spots according to what is required by city code here. So now we have the opportunity to deny or to demand changes to the plat.
Or condition of approval.
As a condition of approval, you will bring this into conformance with city code.
Yep.
So I'm just trying to distinguish between like, that may sound like, oh, I'm biased towards bicycle parking. No, we have city code that says you need bicycle parking at this level and you don't have any bicycle parking. So we're not like that's not a taking from the developer, right? We can't be accused of a takings claim in that case. We're just bringing it up to conformance.
Yeah, and on that same vein, we used to in Sandpoint before I got here, there were recommendations, staff recommendations, approved, denied. And Will Harrington said, that's a bad idea because if you have the latitude, which you do, to overrule the staff's recommendation, you've now set the city up in a situation where the professional staff's recommending one thing, council's doing another. So the way I used to word them is, you know, council can approve if they find that this standard's been met, this standard's been met. and sort of subtly calling out where staff doesn't think it meets the standard. So really trying to put that onus and that burden on the council to determine, instead of like staff saying it doesn't meet the bicycle parking standard, it would say, you know, council can approve that they think that 6 meets the requirement of 7. So generally getting away from staff recommendations of approval denial to just staff presenting the facts of the case or the application.
Something happened between Will Harrington and us, because when I got here, there were recommendations being made and I was like, we're done.
Aren't they recommended conditions of approval now?
Well, there's that.
Yes, that's appropriate. The staff just can't say, I recommend that council approve this, or I recommend council deny this. Staff just presents the facts. It's the council's job. So then you're gonna make, second, debate, vote on motions, you know that, and participate in reviewing and approving the written decision. I leave that in there because we don't have that process here in Sandpoint, but we do in Hayden, we do in my other cities, and I'm hoping maybe we can talk about getting back to that.
Yeah, I mean, hearings closed. I mean, depending on how you interpret parliamentary procedures, doesn't there have to be a motion to start debate or discussion? Or can we just go from closed hearing to deliberations?
Go from closed hearing right to deliberation. Okay. Yeah. So, role of the applicant, I put this in here just so to help educate the public as they talk with you about, you know, coming here and providing comment. So, the applicant needs to present a summary of their application and support for their request. They need to answer any questions from you or P&Z, and then they need to rebut their testimony from opponents or from the opponents of the application. So that's the applicant's job. Sometimes we get a real flowery presentation from the applicant that doesn't speak to the actual standards of approval. Your planning staff actually has historically done a great job of explaining to them what they need to present as part of their presentation. Sometimes they don't follow through, but that's the applicant's job. Sorry, I jumped the gun. Role of the citizens. So the citizen's job is to testify to the positive or negative impacts of the proposal, informing the decision maker about the characteristics of the site and suggesting acceptable alternatives or ways to mitigate negative impacts of the proposal. So there's very specific role of community members in public hearing, and that's what this is. It's not just my opinion about certain things. There's very specific value that they can offer to the public hearing process if they'll stick to sort of this rule of thumb. Meaning it's not just a come complain, it's a present your problem with also a potential solution. Whether you accept it or not doesn't, you know, that's not the issue. It's that they give you meaningful information. So your determination after the hearing, explain the criteria and standards considered relevant by council and state the facts relied upon, and explain the justification for the decision based on the criteria and standards. We've talked about this quite a bit today. You'll have your standards of approval, apply the facts that you've heard to those standards of approval and conclusions of law. This is the one that throws everybody for a loop all the time. Idaho Code 67-6519 subsection 5 specifically says in C that the actions, you have to tell the applicant what actions, if any, that they can take to obtain approval. And so if you're going to outright deny an application, you have to tell them what they need to do to obtain your approval. And if there's no way to obtain approval, you have to make findings on that. So you have to make a finding on how they're never going to obtain approval. So I think Jason's example earlier of an annexation is a perfect example to use here, where it might meet the future land use map intentions at some point in the future. It just doesn't right now. So your denial might include an explanation, would include an explanation in your findings of why it's just not ripe under the future land use map yet. Does that make sense? Nope, Pam's looking at me with her puzzled face.
So
my face.
If they wanted to go to commercial, it's residential to now, or
right.
The comp plan, and they said the comp plan land use map says this should be commercial high intensity in the next 15 to 20 years. You could say, you know, we're denying the comp plan amendment and the zone change because we have plenty of commercial, you know, we've vacancy in our commercial area. It's not necessary to add commercial inventory to our city right now. maybe in the future, as our commercial areas fill out, it will be appropriate.
So time might be the answer to how they could potentially obtain approval in the future. Reconsideration, just so you know, so any final decision made with the city, the applicant is obligated to, within 14 days, ask for reconsideration first before they have a right to appeal. So you may see an application 3 times. You may see the original public hearing, a request for reconsideration, and an appeal. You could. You have. And then if they still don't like the answer, then they can take it up on petition for judicial review. I will tell you that the best way for us to get petitions dismissed by the court is somebody's failure to ask for reconsideration first within the appropriate time frame. So we do use that as a technical mechanism to get those dismissed.
And those are business days or calendar days?
Those are 14 calendar days. And you don't have to worry about those timeframes. We're calculating all of that. We're also looking at standing when some of these applications come in. Is this actually an affected person? There have been times where we've received a request for reconsideration from somebody who's not defined as an affected person. They can, and we notify them of that. Then they can, of course, ask for reconsideration of that decision if they wish. But we have had opportunity where you've not seen those requests because they weren't actually presented by an affected party.
That happened with Herndon in the festival, didn't it? He found he didn't have standing.
The first case.
The first
So
case.
when Bonner County sued the festival, the county didn't have standing. Herndon specifically in the second case did.
Okay, so it was the county that didn't have standing. I knew that happened in there at some point. So.
You are correct. So some of your other responsibilities separate from hearings, so we're going to kind of move out of that a little bit. Appointment and removal. So confirmation of mayoral appointments to and removal from permanent city boards, commissions, and committees. You've already seen that a bit. So the mayor will bring you recommended names for commissions and committees, and you will confirm those. Confirmation of the mayor's nomination or removal of appointed officers by a majority of the full council. So you have statutory appointed positions, and then you as a city can adopt an ordinance where you create positions in addition to that are appointed. Those positions are the mayor's nomination and then confirmed by council with a majority of council vote. Removal of appointed officers by the council without the mayor's approval requires unanimous vote of council. So if it's a council initiated removal of an appointed position, it has to be unanimous. If it's a mayoral request for removal, it's half the council plus 1. So it's majority of council. That's by Idaho code. Your job is to fill a mayoral vacancy from within or without council as deemed in the best interest of the city. So if Jeremy were to resign tomorrow and we have a vacancy, you would declare the vacancy and you would have the responsibility of appointing a mayor to fulfill the rest of the term. And then again, as I indicated earlier in that previous bullet point, you may establish appointed offices in addition to the city clerk, treasurer, and city attorney. So
what about
police and fire
appointment of a vacant council position?
So appointment of a vacant council position will fall to council as well.
My nomination there.
And then I promise we're almost done. I have 2 slides left and there's a lot of stuff in there, but we're not going to talk about everything in detail. Some miscellaneous things that you do. You select a council member to serve as president of the council. You may provide by ordinance for election of council members by seat or district. You may establish runoff elections for mayor and or designated council seats. You may by ordinance establish permanent city boards, commissions, and committees. You've seen that, not all of this. You've seen that a bit. You set compensation for the mayor and council members by ordinance. You designate by ordinance an official city newspaper for publishing legal notices. Isn't that fun? We get to do that by ordinance, right? You request by resolution a census or enumeration of the inhabitants of the city. So you can request when you want a census done to really get a good gauge on population and all your census data for within your city. You need to have a local disaster emergency declaration. So you need to have an emergency plan. You would sustain that emergency declaration within 70 days following the mayor's declaration of some sort of emergency. You saw that a bit. You saw that during COVID. You approve the disposal of surplus real property and leases of city-owned real property. That's kind of a big one. So that's important. You have, that should fall a little bit into your fiscal responsibilities of managing your assets. But if there's a staff recommendation or some idea that maybe you have a piece of property that you aren't going to use at any point in the future, it has to get declared surplus by you before we engage in the process of what it looks like to sell it, which is, believe it or not, a bidding process. So. You adopt a resolution for retention of city records. Melissa is the keeper and the master of all retention policies and issues related to retention. You approve by resolution the transfer of permanent records to the state archives for permanent storage. You probably haven't seen one of those yet, but you will, hopefully. And you approve a copy fee schedule for public records. Isn't that an interesting little bullet point? Yeah. And public records requests right now, in my opinion, just having done this for a long time, are over the top everywhere. Our poor staff in every governmental entity is just being bludgeoned by public records requests. So
they've got their own Facebook group, Bonner County Public Records Requests.
Oh my goodness.
And they just every day the ones are getting posted.
Wow.
Can I weigh in here just for 1 second? I won't take long, but this would just be a good time, I think, for me just to hit on one thing I wanted to talk about, which we touched on earlier, and that is retention of records. The only records that I see council really generating yourselves are email messages and possibly notes that you're making, particularly here in the room. I'll deal with that one first really quick because it's an easy answer that the Attorney General has weighed in on because somebody asked a specific question. What if I am taking notes at the dais and I leave those behind? I have to deal with that now because that's a public record. And so I've got to put that into the record. So please take your notes. They're probably transitory. They're not something that's necessarily permanent. It was just during the meeting. If you take them with you, that's part of your own council record. About something that if the decision has already been made, and then it's your own notes, your own thoughts. And the Attorney General weighed in and said that if you take those with you, that's kind of for your own personal record, if you want to keep those. Email is the beast, and it's not been tamed anywhere entirely. And here's the problem with it: correspondence for records retention is based on subject matter. So email messages or correspondence. They used to be memos and letters. Now it's email. I mean, that's what everybody does. We don't type out memos anymore and mail them. The issue with correspondence and whether it can be disposed of immediately, how often during the day are we deleting messages? All day long, right? Thank you, got it, or here's when that meeting is, or whatever. We're deleting those, they're transitory. That's fine. Council doesn't need to weigh in on that. The question comes in when that correspondence relates to the creation or amendment of public policy. How do we determine that on a technology level? We need to keep this one or not that one. There's some ideas about how to do that, but just so you're aware, a couple of things. One, if you have anything like that, where you feel like you're communicating regarding public policy, forward those to me. I have a retention system for that. And so I can take that and I can put it into our permanent record for that policy. If you feel like that's happening by email to some degree, forward it to me. It shouldn't be happening by email between council members anyway. But maybe you, for whatever reason, have emailed someone else about it or they've emailed you. The other one is, and Fonda can correct me if I'm wrong, these messages you do receive from the members of the public, Not, in my opinion, not all of them rise to the level of permanent retention. If it's not regarding a public hearing, first of all, they shouldn't be emailing you. If it does, they should be emailing the clerk so I can get that in a permanent record, forward those to me. But if it's basic day-to-day comments about things or ideas they may have, I believe that's transitory. We don't need to put that in the permanent record. Those are things that you may have a phone conversation would be the same thing, and that's not going to be a record. Or they walk into City Hall and we have a chat at the counter about it. We're not going to keep a record of that. Email on that type of a conversation would be the same. So I believe you can delete those and you don't need to worry about trying to keep them. But one thing I do want to make you aware of is we do get public records requests regularly for copies of email messages. And so, if we get a request for email messages of elected officials, and you may not even know it's happening, we're going to dive into your email accounts. So IT will be going into your email accounts to search.
Do you notify us when that happens?
Not always.
No.
You might get notified if there's a suspicion that you also used your private email account, because then we would have to get all of your private emails from you, and you would need to sign an affidavit that you produced all of those private emails, because we're not going to take responsibility for whether or not you produced all of your private emails. Well, and part of it too is integrity of the record, right? I mean, and it's not that any of you would do this, but I have a responsibility that I swore an oath to do to maintain the integrity of the record. I can't take the chance that I'm letting everybody know, hey, in a couple of days, I'll be searching your email for something. Like I said, not that any of you would do that, but I have that obligation to maintain that integrity. So, and we make the assumption that everything that's in your email account is public record and completely disclosable. Always feel like somebody could walk right up to your computer and be on it and get on. And if somebody walked into my office right now and said, I'm getting on your computer to check your email, I back away and go get a snack. I don't care. Yeah. Nothing in my email, it cannot be seen. Unless you're a supervisor and maybe there's a couple of things in that way. But other than that, have at it.
Well, and to clarify, everything in your email is public record. The question is whether or not it's disclosable. Yeah. So just keep that in the back of your mind too.
Well, and we get public records requests all the time. Please produce all email communications between Jason Welker and Citizen X, because they're assuming you're having some conversation with Citizen X in private. They're trying to catch you, right? They want an aha moment of you violated the Open Meeting Act. That's what they're looking for. And those come in all the time.
Communication between a council member and a citizen for example, in answering questions that they have about something, that wouldn't be in violation of the Open Meeting Act because it doesn't involve other council members.
No, but it's still public record.
Right. Okay.
So those are two different. Those are two different.
Right.
Legal vehicles.
Could include disparagement.
And this is, but again, like, I do respond to citizens when they have questions about stuff, but not if it's a quasi judicial thing we're waiting to hear on, you know, I mean, nothing related to that, but I get emails about our multimodal plan. I get emails about ADA issues, and I'm responding to those. There's nothing wrong with that, right? We can respond to those. They're public record. Yeah. Again, like, I just want to clarify, like, this is not to scare us into like never replying.
Have that flow of information.
Yeah.
We don't want it.
And so are you saying delete those after?
Well,
you
I guess there's a difference between, public records and records retention. That's the other thing that has to be understood. That, like Fauna said, these are all public records. How long do I have to keep them is the question.
Right.
If it's transitory and it's just back and forth with somebody and it's not creation of policy or, you know, going down that road, it's not something that you need to keep. You can say, okay, that conversation is over and you can delete it. You're not required to retain it. According to our city records retention schedule, and which is based on state law, it's transitory correspondence. And
so you can delete.
What's that?
You can delete those.
Yes, it's until administrative need ends. That's the retention on it. That's the only retention on it. And that means you're finished with it.
Just to clean
that conversation's done.
I don't delete anything, just my own person, because I think it looks worse to not be able to provide it.
That list.
I just make a folder. I've got 50 folders. Public, council, county, planning, parks.
Just knowing though, that now all of that's disclosable when a public records request is done.
Because they'll think the worst if it's not there. They'll say, oh, it's deleted. What are you talking about?
But if it's transitory, it can be deleted.
It can be, and then there's that debate about how long do we keep these records, because now they become
a public records. Like, you know, now we're going back years, maybe perhaps, whatever, and where that could have been deleted a long time ago, the retention ended on it a long time ago, but it's still kept. And now it's required that we have to go back and supply all that in the public records, which is fine, you can do that, it's a time issue.
Right.
It becomes,
It's a perception too. If I haven't deleted anything and they make a public records request between Jeremy and Pam, and my email box
And I have.
has 6 of them and yours are all deleted, they're gonna say, what kind of,
But just because I clean it up, it's like, I don't like to see that big list.
no, I don't either. 0 emails with there. Everything's in a
Unlike my
folder.
So do you delete yours?
In my
I
inbox.
haven't deleted an email in 22 years.
You're not gonna start now. They just fall off the page eventually. so.
I might have something to say about that eventually.
I want to go back
Okay.
to notes also, just because I recently had to do this research for somebody else. If you keep notes that help you make your decision and you keep those notes to yourself, those are not a public record and do not have to be disclosed. If you share your notes with anybody, they are now a public record. So if you've shared them, if you've given them to anybody, if you put them in email form and send them, if you type them up in a Word document and share them, even as simple as if you are at the dais and you show somebody your notes and the public sees it, now they're a public record. So.
Could you quick take us through from the staff perspective of a public records request? Like, how does
Melissa
that
could
come
probably
in?
blend.
Yeah, how does that come in? What is your time frame?
Sure, oh, no,
And how much
absolutely.
time does that take and how many are you getting a day?
I'll give you the quick and dirty. So basically, the city can require, any entity in the state can require written public records requests. The city does require that. So we have a form that we use. It's posted online. So anyone who wants to make a public records request can simply fill out that form. It's attached to an automatic routing process that comes through and allows us to attach time limits to that, etc. You're not required to use that form. I encourage people to do it. If they refuse to do it, and I have people who refuse sometimes, they can simply email me and I fill it out for them. They still use it. I do for them. Anyway, it comes through a routing process that comes to the city clerk's office. And most of those requests, honestly, are for public works or planning. Most of them are about stormwater plans or building permits or building plans, etc. So that's where the vast majority of those go. We have 3 business days in which to respond to those requests. Ridiculous. It is. But if we need more time, we have up to 10 business days from the date of the request. And we use that, I would say, about a third of the time. Partly because sometimes we have to go out to the Woodland building and we have to go track down old building permits or plans, etc., or we have to dig into records to find them.
Is that where we keep our old records?
Yeah, if you ever wanted to.
Really? I never knew what was
Let me know.
some old disused police cars.
Yeah, no, there's records in there. So those come in and the city clerk's office coordinates all of that, but staff across the city participates. So those are sent out and forwarded to departments who provide the records that they're looking for. And then the city clerk's office sends out the final response, and it's almost always 89% done by email. Once in a while we get a request for paper records, but most of the time it's all digital.
How many do you have coming in a day?
I did an average of last year. We had 4.5 per week last year. I did an average of so far this year recently, and we're over 5 to 6 a week now. It's
and they're mostly from individual citizens or from people who have an interest in an upcoming application or what?
It's a real mix. A lot of it is actually their firms who are seeking environmental, impact sorts of reports. They're developers, they're real estate agents a lot of the time. And sometimes it's individuals, a lot of the time it is. I'm wondering about their own property or neighboring properties, or I say properties because it's frequently about properties. So much of the time, a lot of the time it's about properties, unless there's some controversial topic going on at the time, and then we're receiving those. Now, I'm talking about just public records related not to police. That's a whole other issue. So I am not the records custodian of police records. The police chief does. And so he has a records clerk who handles all of that. Their volume is probably double probably double at least what are the non-police records.
Well, that's probably why it feels heavy on our end, is because we see a smattering of both.
It's bad at the county too.
Oh.
It's bad everywhere.
And I learned my first day at City Hall in 2007, Mr. Sleddiger came in and said, I want these files, this public records request. And in all sincerity, I was like, what are you looking for? I can help you. And he said, I'll go easy on you, Mr. Graham, because it's your first day. By Idaho code, you're not allowed to ask why I want these public records requests.
We can ask, he's right, we can ask them to narrow the scope, like, can you give us a date range, or can you give us a, usually it's a date range that we ask them to narrow it, so it's not all emails in perpetuity between, you know, Justin, Dick, and Deb Rule, because they can ask for that, and they do, so.
And we don't deny public records requests very often. We find a way, we will communicate with the requester without breaking the law, without asking them what it's for. We don't care, honestly.
What would be the denial?
We recently denied a request because of what Fonda just mentioned. It was too voluminous.
Yeah.
So the law does require that you provide enough information for the record you're searching for to allow staff to find that with reasonable effort. That one was denied because it was beyond reasonable effort. And it was basically, it was a request for a search of our entire email account. And it was a date between certain dates, but our entire email account to see if anyone had ever received or sent a message to a particular email address. Wow. And I've spoken with IT about this, and they've told me that's not the way our system works, right? So we have to, with reasonable effort, be able to find those things. And the frustrating thing sometimes too for staff is that sometimes they're fishing expeditions regularly. But again, it's not up to us to ask the reason. A lot of times they're out of state questions. I don't know, we talked about legislation earlier. There is a piece of legislation going through the legislature right now, which looks like it may pass, which allows an extension of out to 20 days, I believe it is. Have you seen this one? For responses to out-of-state requests. So to kind of keep it all at least. Well, and even for cities, even out of city or out of county, sometimes where it's once in a while, you can tell sometimes when it's a fishing expedition for something, and they're public records, they certainly have a right to them, but it is very time consuming for staff.
And we're trying to work internally to give Melissa more support right now. Cassidy helps by trying to figure out what the best way to get Melissa more support for that stuff is.
Thank you.
I do have a quick question. You refer to public policy, code, ordinance, public policy. Same thing?
Exactly.
Okay.
Policy, code, ordinance, resolution, any decision you're making that's not specific to a landowner.
Okay, and then you just tell me if this is probably an agenda item or something to be discussed another time. The ordinance of the official newspaper for publishing legal notices is the Daily Bee. People don't get it. They have asked me to put things in the reader. I've talked to Ben before. He said he's offered a deal. I don't know if that's something we have to talk about at another time to change the ordinance or to add that newspaper. It's free. People like it.
There's specific publication requirements in terms of circulation. And this wouldn't be the place to do that.
To another,
We
okay.
could certainly look at
I
that.
just put that out there.
It's my understanding that the bee wouldn't qualify because of their.
The reader.
The bee does qualify.
The reader wouldn't qualify because of circulation, paid circulation.
Was not paid, but it huge circulation.
There's some real
Okay.
specifics in
Check that out another time.
And that's clearly outlined in statute and state code, those requirements.
Okay. And off the top of your head?
The code section? No.
It's in Title 50.
It's in Title 50,
All right.
yeah.
All right, because then I can answer
I
why
could
it's
tell-
not in
Exactly
there.
right, look it up and tell
Because
you.
people do ask me, why don't you put it
Tell
in the
Ben
reader? Huh?
tell Ben to talk to Zach. Zach understands why.
Well, they're not the ones that are.
Is this Zach or a
requesting.
different Zach?
No, Zach,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Zach Hagedon understands the limitations of the reader and why it would be challenging to do.
Okay, it's the public that are asking. It's not Zach.
Oh, yeah, so that's the reason.
I mean, I just happened to talk to Ben before about it just because
So last slide real quick, we're gonna, these are all the areas where the courts get involved in your business, so. Reason. So review of your city laws, policies, and activities for conformity with state and federal law and constitutional provisions. If something were to come up regarding your ordinance or your city laws, that can go to a court if needed. You know, 90% of the time, somebody's gonna bring it to our attention. We're gonna do an internal review and make an adjustment if there really is an issue, especially a constitutional issue. And it happens. Your codes are not reviewed every day, all the time, for compliance with every change to the law that comes in. We try. So July 1st is the date that every new Idaho code section is enacted. And so we will know, as this legislation is going through, we will know what gets approved between now and when it's going to come out and be effective July 1st. And we're going to be auditing your city codes for that. But sometimes things are missed. I mean, that's just a burdensome responsibility. And so it will be a community member that brings that forward, and we'll do an evaluation and resolve that without it having to go to the court. But if we have an absolute disagreement, it may need a judge determination. Adjudication of cases involving a violation of city ordinances and sentencing upon conviction. That's criminal stuff and or zoning violations that need to go in front of a civil court. Tort claims, so somebody that sues the city for wrongdoing. Determination of compensable damages on those. So tort claims all go to the court. Appeals concerning rezones, conditional use permits, variances, subdivision, preliminary plats, and other land use matters. So those petitions for judicial review will go in front of the district court. Enforcement of Idaho Open Meeting Law and Public Records Act. If there is somebody who really believes that we have violated open meeting law and or the Public Records Act, their remedy is to go to the court. Judicial confirmation of validity of indebtedness or multi-year obligations. So the city can't take out a loan without either going to the public or having a judicial confirmation, or sometimes both, depending on what the indebtedness is. Determination of just compensation for private property owners in eminent domain cases. So if we have to do right of way acquisition and we can't come to an amicable agreement with a private property owner for how much we're going to pay for their land that we need to purchase, we go into court and the judge decides what the amount is. That's the just compensation. It doesn't mean the judge tells us we can't obtain the right of way. It means that the judge tells us what the amount we're going to pay is. Issuing declaratory judgments which are used to establish rights of particular parties and express the opinion of the court on questions of law. That's very broad. People will file deck actions regularly to have a court determine that some action we took was either legal or not legal. And then the last one is my favorite. So issuing writs of mandamus, which are used to compel a performance of a ministerial duty. So going back to the question we had earlier of what if a council member just refuses to vote on a particular action? If there is no legal reason for them not to vote and it is in dereliction of their duty to not vote, I can go ask the court for a writ of mandamus to force them to vote. So that was a good example for writ of mandamus. And that was a quick buzz through, but you guys already asked great questions, and that concludes our legal training anyways.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The question about talking to counselors. So 2 is a meeting in person. If I wanted to talk to Jason and Justin about something separately, is that my limit?
It's
out of
so there's 2 different
6 of
issues
us
going on. So you can't create a quorum,
Right.
which is then a serial meeting.
Right.
But you can't have a conversation with one or more that helps you make an ultimate decision. That's a deliberation. So you want to be really careful what you're talking to them about.
Okay. So questions on something. Okay, so no, there is no then.
This goes back to the quasi judicial.
Not just quasi judicial. Deliberations are not delineated between quasi judicial and legislative. So on a legislative decision, code adoption, you can talk to all the public you want and get all the input you want. But you can't and shouldn't have conversations with council members where the two of you are helping each other come to your ultimate decision. That's defined as a deliberation. I know, it's a very quiet, lonely world once you do that.
I thought you had said I could talk to more than two, because I said, how many can you talk to out of 6 before it's too many?
Well, it depends on what you're talking about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We could
Okay,
all
and I
get
had-
together and have a dinner party, but we can't talk
Yeah.
about council
City
business.
business, right.
But we've all, I mean, I think from my first experience on these commissions, we've always said that it's probably a good idea not to gather in a quorum level,
Right,
you know, in any circumstances.
right,
Um,
and that would be,
Although you may, I mean, if there's no discussion going on about anything city related, you're not in violation of anything if that were to happen.
That's correct.
The
and
optics.
then why would I want to talk to you?
We're all hanging out at the Oktoberfest party together. We're not gonna have like, you know, a complaint filed that we were all at
Right.
Oktoberfest at the same time. But if two of us are there talking about an upcoming public hearing we're gonna hold and saying, how are you gonna vote on this?
Right, I
that's
understand that, I'm
Not
just
just
talking
the public
email
hearing,
content.
Or-
any decision.
Any decision, I shouldn't, yeah, legislative or quasi judicial.
Awesome. I've got Sarah and Isis coming down, and we try to cut off at 12:30. Love to go over the next strategic plan elements that I've prepared, and we may need to revisit this, but we can at least jump into it. So I'm trying to.
Pulling up what's online, because I can do that.
Yeah, I'm trying to, well, no, this is, I've got some photos I wanted to share.
Oh, okay.
Will I join the meeting?
You would have received, go to emails.
Yes. Okay, thanks.
Well,
Can we get a chair for you, Sarah?
Okay. No, I don't see. Okay, there.
Oh, thank you.
Should we take another just quick break, Carrie?
Sure, just quick minute. Reconvening city council training and strategic planning workshop. It is 11:43 a.m. Thanks, everyone. Moving on to the next portion of today. I hope we have enough time to at least whet your appetite on this or wet your whistle, so to speak. And if we need more time, we're happy to have another meeting, but I'll try to get right to the point. Included in the packet is a document which is going to look pretty familiar to our existing strategic plan 2022 to 27, except it says proposed Mayor Jeremy Grimm. I have that up on the board. I guess to start, I'll give you my perspective and then I seek your comment. But what I've learned in the last 9 weeks is that we've got some big issues. And my goal for the next 4 years is to tackle these big issues. And those issues are our wastewater plant, our streets, our water transmission system and related intergovernmental agreements we have with Ponderay, Syringa, Northside, et cetera. And then finally, trying to help our existing businesses maintain the diversity that we have here in our economy today. So that's to some degree, I say, you know, do I need that? I'm telling you, that's what I'm going to focus on in the next 4 years. That's for me, whether I'm here in 5 years, who knows, but the next 4 years, those are my goals. I recognize that we have shared goals and we all want to accomplish a lot together. But I'll sort of walk through this and open to amending, adding, but I'd love to just have the chance to walk through and share with you what I see as strategic plan, strategic priorities after 9 weeks, and then take your feedback. So,
Jeremy, I have a request. If we could split screen with the old comp or with the old strategic plan,
I
so we
could
can
probably
make
do that.
comparisons, and then maybe just to bring up to speed, like some of the things that have dropped off the list, so that we know, oh, that's been handled, that was
Yeah.
something that we had wanted to. Does that make sense?
it does. Let's see, give me just a second, and I think
So
I
I
can
can
do
give the
that.
staff kudos for what they've accomplished from the last meeting.
Yep. There we go. Let me get this one out of here. What is that? Oh. I just need to get the agenda up here. Okay. Pull the other one.
We had it in our meetings.
I'm just trying to pull up the current.
Yeah.
The easiest way, just go to the homepage.
Okay.
Navigate there with us.
How do I move that out of here?
The SP is the meetings, and I think it was in the agenda
Go to
packet.
SP right there,
Thank you.
and then just hit the, there you go.
You go to this first,
Yeah, the agenda.
it was in that
Just hit the agenda.
document.
Oh, thank you. There we go, and we can go. Beautiful. We're getting there. Okay, so then let me move this over. Maximize that. Break this off into another one. Side.
We could be half of one now.
Moving in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Okay, second. Get them to the right sizes.
Using all your skills here.
Let me just
No mouse.
No mouse. There we go. And smaller. Okay, there you have it. All right, cool. I think that's what you're looking for. So
Yes.
on the right, existing on the left. Sorry that took so long. So as I mentioned, you know, and I guess let me just go through and then we can go back and try to compare. So in terms of integrated planning, top priorities, obviously adopt the comp plan, follow through by revising Sandpoint City Code, update the development impact fees, obviously supports the staff's levels in the planning community development department, reevaluate utility services and policy and growth in the ACI, as we talked about, including potentially adding development impact fees, negotiate, adopt updated ACI boundaries with the county, and then finally complete Title II ADA accessibility, compliance, and plan implementation. We can just go, you know, you can kind of see what some of those were. So, housing diversity and growth, I took that out completely. And the reason for that is with over 600 units currently being developed in town, and another 600 in the planning process, I feel like the free market has responded to the demands of housing. And frankly, I think we're going to have a surplus of housing, at least in the next 4 years, if all that stuff gets built. And it seems like the free market's taking care of that. I know it's a long-term issue we'll continually have to address in Sandpoint, but in terms of priorities, it feels to me like that's kind of a priority that's being taken care of by the private sector.
Is it being taken care of affordability wise?
The downward pressure on rental units is unbelievable right now. Sarah, who just left, was renting on Pine and Lincoln, $1,500 a month. They've relisted that at $1,100 a month. So it's coming down. You see the flags up, which are illegal, but there's a lot of units coming on the market. But we can get into details as we proceed. But in terms of the apples to apples. You know, truck routes is out. Recreational component of the watershed master plan seems like it's pretty much been done. Parking supply and demand doesn't seem like a huge priority to me right now. Truck routes, that's sort of urban area mass transportation plan related. And the city code update, that's kind of been carried forward in the comp plan revisions and related zoning provisions. In terms of reliable community infrastructure, this is a big one for me. My number one priority is to initiate and complete the design and financing and build of a new wastewater treatment plant. I will just jump over there real quickly for you so you can understand what we're dealing with. Yesterday, I just dropped into the wastewater plant unannounced, and I think you will recall in the last 2 weeks I met with DEQ, Dan McCracken, regarding our wastewater plant and our permit and the process to go forward. I've met with all the engineers that have worked on it, JUB, Stantec, and others who've been doing our work on collection and design of the plant. But I just wanted to bring it home if you haven't had the chance to spend some time in the plant. This thing on the left, this is the filter screen. We just got a new replacement you might have seen in the bills. This basically takes all the junk in the sewage out, grinds it, and it prevents it from going through the system, and it makes a big wad of basically toilet paper you see up here. That's comes out into a green dumpster and gets hauled away. The auger that does that, this is the auger that broke a couple weeks ago. We just replaced that yesterday, the day before. So we've got a new auger, but because that was broken, basically all that garbage and junk and plastic that gets flushed down the toilet or elsewhere ends up in our digesters, which is not a good thing. And I'll show you in a second. This portion where this filter goes, I mean, you can't see the top, but black mold, rust, this facility is pretty scary to look at. Just to give you a perspective, in this facility, this is a natural gas line. I don't have a zoom in on that, but I can tell you if I hit that with a hammer or bumped it, that is so corroded. I would hate to think of what would happen if, you know, that broke and we had a gas leak down there. Other pictures in the plant, we've got pipes that have been cut off, stubbed, dead-ended, leaking. It's a pretty dismal sight. Some of the pipes down there, you've heard that we've had some ruptures. The guys down there are literally MacGyver on the spot, like constantly. Most of their time is spent dealing with fires in this plant. This is our sludge tank. You can't see it really well, but on the left there, that's a bunch of that garbage that goes into our sludge. Now Woods comes and hauls that off and spreads it, but obviously they're not going to be thrilled if there's a bunch of plastic and garbage in the sludge because it should be an organic material. So they have to go then and reprocess this and grind it again so that that's all taken out. Since they've fixed that, you can see kind of a line here. That's the sludge comes out very slowly, but that plastic is when the auger was broken. The new sludge to the right and below is very clean. This is the floating top that you might have seen in the bills. The floating, oh, dang it, right? Is that my battery line? Bugger. I think that is your computer. So the floating top, can you just hit OK on that? Or
Yeah,
close?
sorry.
So there used to be a top on top of this sludge container. These are the rusted out supports for that top. They literally rusted away. And this is the top they had to pick up and remove. That floating top keeps smells and odors and gases contained and also tells them the level of the sludge. This is looking underneath. You can see that red arrow, like this thing has been there since the 50s and literally rusted apart. So they just took it off because they didn't have an alternative. This is the belt press, 1980s era, totally rusted. I mean, I could go in there and touch anything and it would literally almost crumble and fall apart. You can see some of the rust on, I mean, I guess the point is, you know, our blowers, these guys are pulling motors out, trying to replace these. There's so much ongoing maintenance in this plant, and, you know, to rebuild and replace these motors, $15,000 a piece for pumps and motors. This is how they're this is the power to a pump that failed next to the clarifiers or the aerator. They literally have an extension cord running down into a manhole or utility hole to power an emergency pump down there. Our chlorine gas, if these bottles were disturbed, there's enough chlorine here to kill our whole community. We do on-site chlorine storage to disinfect the wastewater. Modern plants do something called on-site generation, where they actually create just how much chlorine they need at that moment using other chemicals. So you're not stockpiling enough chlorine to kill a small village. So in essence, how do I get rid of this and show? I just want to say that this plant is my number one priority as mayor, and I have walked through DEQ. The process for funding and designing this would be getting a engineer's analysis of either a full turnkey system on site on the cover of wastewater today that we build basically at once, or alternatively looking at incremental elements like the digester, the disinfector, and doing them piecemeal to try to stop the bleeding effectively. So that engineering assessment will be coming to you shortly. Once we get that, that would drive our preliminary engineering of a new plant with a cost estimate. DEQ says we would need to go out to a bond to get voter approval for paying for that. Once we get a determination from the voters, we would then go back to DEQ and say, we've got the funding, we've got the plan. DEQ would say, okay, we're going to now look at your rates and we're going to backfill with grant funding and low interest loans so that your rates don't go up more than 2% for the medium, what's considered affordable for a median income household in the city. So we go through a legislative process, connecting our senators, our congressmen, governor, departments in the state to get as much funding. They give us a funding package, working with our engineers who help us on this, and then we put it out to bid. It's my hope that if everything aligns, we could potentially be starting a rebuild on this plant next fall, fall of 2025. And I'm just telling you, this is something we got to deal with. It's sad that for the water quality, for our employees, for our ratepayers to be doing what we're doing down there right now. So we do have violations regularly. If you're not aware, you're probably not aware. E. coli, chlorine, maximum chlorine, and other violations. And DEQ said, thanks for coming down and visiting. My concern was, are we going to incur $100,000 a day for some violation? They said, the fact that you're here telling us that this is your number one priority, Mayor, we will work with you and we will get you moving along. But getting back to community infrastructure, my number one priority in the next 4 years is to solve this wastewater plant facility.
Jeremy, since you've started as mayor, have you explored or thought at all about potential collaboration with Kootenai Pond Sewer District?
Yep. They approached me about 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago. Representative from the governor's office approached me. Kootenai Pond is under a 2028 deadline to meet their discharge permit into the lake. They don't have any wiggle room. It's like, do it by the state or else. So they have to plan. They have to come up with a plan how they're going to do that. Their options were basically build a new facility or potentially hook into our system and take their effluent, and then we design a plant that would somehow take care of both of it and charge them appropriately. They have a early March deadline for their timeline to go out to bond and prepare their design. And I told them I won't have information to know if even that makes sense until March or April, because I'm just learning. So I got the sense that they need to go it on their own. We'll set them down a path for bonding, funding, design, construction.
Because they did the revolving loan that we failed to get, they received, right? Like $15 million.
Yeah.
That would go a long way to connect them to us and kickstart our project if we could possibly get a cooperative agreement of some sort in place.
It would. They expressed to me, and I visited with their engineers, that they were really under the gun to make a decision because, and just knowing the time for us to assess what do those flows mean, what do the flows do to our rates, what does the flow do to our future design, how do you engineer, the transmission of that effluent to the city. It just seemed to me that it was a lot to process in a short amount of time, and I didn't know where we were. So I said, I'll give you an answer, but if you have to act by early March, then the answer right now is we can't commit to taking your effluent. So
it seemed, and again, I'm not an expert in municipal wastewater financing or anything here, but our prospects for, favorable financing for a plant will be much better if we have, the potential of having another 1,000 ratepayers in the system in the future and having them on board. I understand your concern about the timeline. They have like till next week to figure something out. Yeah. But gosh, haven't we been trying to figure this out for like 10 years now?
I think we have. What I learned from DEQ.
I'd hate to miss out on an opportunity to benefit both communities because of a 2-week time crunch that we're facing now after 10 years of talking about this.
Right. Yeah, and they expressed to me they needed an answer
like 10 years ago.
Next week to take or not take their effluent.
So what's keeping us from just answering that? Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a bigger issue. There's a sewer district. Would it require the formation of a new district?
No. Probably not. No.
So they have their district.
Mm-hmm.
Would they be like wholesale customers of ours, basically?
Yep.
Basically, yeah, the inflow would be.
So what's keeping us from agreeing to that? Because any plant we build is going to be far in excess of our current need for capacity. Right. Just like our water treatment, our drinking water treatment plant can produce twice the water that we need as a city.
Yep.
I assume any big investment we make in sewer treatment is going to be for something far bigger than what we need right now.
Yeah.
I remember Greg also presenting to the council about this, and he said something about holding on to the discharge and being able to flow it to the new plant at our leisure, because that would then offset the snow on rain events.
Yeah.
And I remember him saying that we would be able to.
Yeah, they have storage ponds out there.
Yeah.
To answer your question without dodging it, I don't know what I don't know. So to make a commitment to take someone's millions of gallons of effluent
without millions of dollars.
And the millions of dollars without knowing what that obligation would mean, I couldn't answer the question for him.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure anyone could, because it will take study to understand what all this means. Mm-hmm. So, but we can come back and touch on that. I'd love to punch through the rest of the list, but I just wanted to give you a setting of where we are.
The workshop.
The second item under infrastructure, we all have a stormwater challenge here. So I think we should aspire to developing a stormwater master plan and a stormwater utility, and potentially even impact fees for stormwaters. So that's something that is right up there. Obviously, the third bullet there, developing, and maintaining our flows and sewer studies and system planning for our utilities. Critical. Addressing water utility service areas outside the city limits. This is another one of this is probably my number 2 priority. From what I've learned, Pend Oreille is a challenge. If you're not aware, we deliver water to them, to their residents, as well as Kootenai and portions of areas outside of Kootenai. It's one of those situations where the horse is out of the barn, so it's hard to get it back in. We also have wholesale water agreements with Syringa, which is west of town. They have several hundred hookups out there. We also deliver water to the north side water service area, which is north of the fairgrounds, all the way up to Bronx. So those systems all have deficiencies. Pend Oreille is the most concerning because they have millions of dollars of deficiencies, in part because of growth. There's a fire flow issue, meaning the pipes need to be expanded, the capacity needs to be expanded, millions and millions of dollars to do that. We don't have that capability to finance that. It's likely we would have to go out to a bond. And I think it's unlikely that the voters of Sandpoint would approve a bond to improve water lines in another city. So I don't know where this all ends, but I know we have to stop kicking this can down the road. It may end with a big master meter at the city of Sandpoint and Ponderay city limits, us somehow gifting, acknowledging that the water lines out there are now theirs, and politely saying to Ponderay, time to get a meter reader and a utility crew, and you are now managing your water system. That way we're not making land use decisions, we're not making investment decisions about what pipe sizes, we're not having to deal with their master plan and their land use plan saying where's growth going to happen. I'd really like to bring this to a conclusion so that the city of Sandpoint isn't tied up in not only we do have an ongoing, what is it? Is it called is it a suit or a
Lawsuit with
Syringa water system? This is super complex and really heavy lifting, but my goal would be that in 4 years, we have this thing just done forever, because it's been kicked down the road for 20, 30 years. And I'll just leave it at that. It's a big challenge.
And I will say Greg did a great job of sort of putting the wheels in motion on this with the study that was conducted under his supervision, as well as the resulting information that came out of that regarding deficiencies in the systems in multiple jurisdictions. So the starting point is phenomenal. You have a really good launching point at this stage.
But it's going to be
But it's a monstrous.
serious discussions with the mayor and council Ponderay. Syringa, they don't have fire flows out there at all. They don't have fire hydrants. Northside, I mean, it's a lot, but I want to get through it because it's essential that we figure this out. We're going to be dealing with lawsuits and headaches and funding and infrastructure issues forever. And Deb, I appreciate, just because of the time constraints, if I can maybe today, all we do is get through my priorities, then we can come revisit sort of the balance. Or
My request would be that we actually have, what I would consider a real effort to have a strategic, like a full day.
Sure.
Because my recollection historically is that the council comes up with the priorities, not necessarily the mayor.
Sure.
And we all agree upon what those are.
Yeah.
And yes, 45 minutes to an hour is,
So maybe this will just set the stage,
Yeah,
bring you
that's
all
fine.
up to stage. Yeah, I'm totally agreeable to that.
I would also kind of second that I think, first of all, I want to acknowledge what I consider the deficiencies of our existing strategic plan. I didn't feel like it was a collaborative enough process to develop it 2 years ago.
Correct.
It was, in education, we used to call it facility manipulation, or you facilitate something, but you're also basically just doing something for the stakeholders. I think I would love for this body to collaborate on a strategic plan that is, and this probably needs to happen after final adoption of the comprehensive plans, because ultimately the strategic plan is putting that comp plan into a 1 to 5 year time horizon with actionable items. Neither the existing strategic plan nor your version of it, I think, is actionable enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I really appreciate that you're laying out like your strategic priorities in this, but there's a lot that's been removed from the old one, and even the old one didn't have what I think most of us consider as important strategic priorities. So I agree that we should probably have a strategic planning workshop, and I would request that we actually, and I know we don't like to spend taxpayer money unnecessarily, but bringing in some facilitator. It doesn't have to be somebody flying from Texas or something. I think that's where the last guy came from, but there are regional facilitators for strategic planning sessions that we could produce if we decide. I would say we either do this or we just scrap the strategic plan, because it's not required by state code, right? We have a comp plan, it's almost done, it's excellent, but it is very broad, very visionary. It's a 20-year plan. Strategic plans are more like 5-year plans. What are the priorities we can focus on in the next 5 years? So if we decide we want a strategic plan, I'd say we either start from scratch. I mean, use what we have. You've thinned out what you don't consider strategic priorities, but there's a lot in the old plan I think some of us do, and there's a lot that's not in either version of it that others of us believe are probably strategic priorities. That's kind of where I am on this. And I understand, like, we are not gonna get that done in the next 20 minutes.
No, I agree. I think that's all good. And maybe the best use of our time is just so I can kind of bring you up to speed on what I'm
I
saying.
really appreciate you sharing your strategic priorities. I do.
Is everyone
I'm fine with that.
okay with that? I'll just kind of run through just to sort of set the stage. of what
Yeah,
I'm
you
seeing.
can cut the split screen if you want
Yeah.
and go back, as long as I know we're gonna
Yeah.
come back to this. I do think that the strategic plan is an important thing, whether required by law or not, so that we know what
Where
is,
we're headed, yeah.
where we're at, and we can have conversations about that.
You
I
know,
think it's very important for budgeting, because it gives also then, staff direction on where to start with budgeting.
Yep, and staffing. Going back to the infrastructure, water utility and service areas outside the city, and then direct all non-essential funding sources to water, wastewater, stormwater, street and sidewalk improvements. In addition to the huge task of addressing the wastewater, the water and the stormwater, you've all seen our streets. I've had lots of discussions with staff about what do we do with our meager funding available to address our street deficiencies. If you've read the multimodal plan and the pavement management work, you'll know that even with $1 million a year, our pavement condition continues to degrade over time. So we need to totally reapproach and figure out what are we going to do on our streets. And we've already started some conversations to how we can partner with the county, utilize our existing street crew, and do some creative things to make sure that our expenditures on streets are done in a way that gets us the most enduring and most coverage of repairs and improvements to our streets. An example of that is looking at, where do we have utility lines that are needing upgrades because the utility fund can pay for some of that street rework if there's a line in the street. Looking at the base condition of those streets. Are those streets, do they have any base? Are they decent? Can we cherry pick where we're going to put these dollars to get the most lane miles done in town? Working with the county, borrowing their asphalt grinder, having Chet and his crew shape and roll and compact the street. So we're just putting asphalt down instead of rebuilding the whole street. Are there streets where that makes sense? So really, that's huge for me. And hopefully you can share some of those priorities. In terms of responsive community service, deliver essential city service efficiently in ways that earn high satisfaction from citizens. And this is in addition, empower staff and department heads. So as Melissa knows and Vonda knows, we need to pursue a pretty significant effort to update our historical records and improve citizen access to information. So they're not doing maybe public records requests. We might be able to do that by putting building permits and projects online. That's what the city of Coeur d'Alene does, making it very transparent. Reevaluating our recreational service and that staffing and structure. That's ongoing. We just get a report from a consultant this week that has some suggestions on how our park and rec department gets laid out. Obviously, looking at our park system, including staffing structure, one of the things that you saw is rather than staffing with seasonal staff, Marcia's Snack Shack, we're putting out a RFP to have a private company come in and just run that. Like, we don't make much money off of it, if any. If somebody wants to come in there and run it and provide some level of service, we can make revenue off of it. Another thing I'm thinking about is, if you've seen a private lawn care company come in, they come in and do a lawn in about 6 to 12 minutes. Do we really need the carts and the trucks and the lawnmowers? Does it make sense maybe to put our mowing for some fields or parks out to the private sector? The HR aspect of hiring seasonal workers is a headache and time consuming and costly. It may benefit us just to say, these green areas, we're going to hire Jeremy's Lawn Care or Joe's Lawn Care to do it, or whatever it may be. So that's what I mean by that. I want to look at how are we, positioning our resources, and is there a more efficient way to do that. And then finally, this was a holdover police call and opportunities that exist within the police department to improve both citizen response and higher value. Workforce priority.
Productivity.
Thank you. Productivity. Obviously, compensation review, including benchmarking, is critical. I'll tell you, we had an amazing applicant for the public works director, very well qualified. And after looking at the comp, he said, sorry, I can't do that. So we need to go through, it hasn't been done in a long time, and look at our benchmarking to make sure we're competitive with equivalent, municipalities and government jobs in the area.
Can I just ask a clarification?
Yeah.
I thought we just did, this was a big effort just last year, like second half of last year, we went through the whole benchmarking process. We spent a couple council meetings. We did the police pay raise across the scale based on benchmarking. So there's been a lot of that going on, that the whole,
it's a staffing analysis. I think that is what I had communicated. That is what hasn't been done in a long time, to have somebody come in and evaluate the responsibilities that each person's doing to make sure their title is matching up to what their responsibilities are, and benchmarking from that. But the benchmarking itself is being done on an annual basis.
Right.
Thanks. Yeah. Sorry, my error. I meant staff.
I was really confused when that was in there. I was like, no, we've been doing this for like a number of years.
But yeah, looking at what are those roles and the responsibilities under them, commensurate with
more job responsibility.
Yep. Because it's a significant barrier for hiring and replacing those. So obviously broaden training, leadership, all that good stuff, apple pie and puppies, performance management, and recognition, accountability.
I did like that you added the word happy to the priority initiative.
I did. Good catch.
Yes, I noticed that.
I want happy.
I think that's important for our city to make sure we have a happy staff.
Yeah.
That'll keep them.
Yeah. Citizen access engagement. Obviously a lot of this is holdover. The first one, talking with Christine, getting that ADA plan moving forward. She's got some amazing ideas. She's gone outside her wheelhouse. She found a professor who does GIS and this sort of thing. She's got a whole plan for about $50,000 where we can show every deficiency on our GIS. Every complaint gets registered on there. It shows up as a dot with information on it. And everyone we've addressed or corrected with a intersection improvement or a street project shows up as a different color so people can see. Smiley face. You've seen this?
No, but I think it'd be a good idea.
Yeah. So it's amazing. Bottom line, it's amazing. She's got this university that's willing to do it as a thesis project. It's really cool. So that's something for a variety of reasons we should be doing, but it's the right thing to do, legally required, and will help us plan our future infrastructure cohesively. We see we're doing an intersection. Whoa, there's 588 things on that intersection. Boom, let's knock them out. So it's pretty cool. Operations, obviously. So citizen committees, the second bullet there, we're doing that right now. Heather's updating all the policies, really setting it up with books, guidelines. She is on it, and we're going to have the best organized city commissions and citizen committees anywhere. It's going to be awesome. Those ordinances will be coming to you shortly. And we're getting great interest from citizens on where that's going to be. There's a staffing issue, liaisons and clerking we're going to have to work through, but already heard from internal staff. People want to be on this one or that one or that one. It's pretty cool. So that's going to hopefully enhance our citizen engagement.
Real quick with that, just since you're on it, I know that there are some other cities, and Wayne Benner is pretty privy to this, that will also include a planning commissioner on the different committees, because a lot of these different things, like a bike head committee, have a lot to do with planning, things like that. Sustainability has a lot to do with planning.
Yep.
So that was something else that him and I had a conversation about, that the planning commissioner is also part of.
Additional. So we're gonna have to tweak all of our ordinance and our policy related to this. This will be coming to the council. So when that comes to council, let's dig in and figure out what we want. Youth, planning commissions, council liaisons, etc. So I think that's really going to help both directions, information flowing to the community and from the community to the council. The organizational structure, obviously that's, as we discussed the last couple council meetings, working on that. We should be making some hires in the next week or so. So that's really exciting for some of those positions. And hopefully building that framework that you can see work, and then we'll just see where that goes. But and then finally, again, apple pie, continually assessing community issues and making sure that we're hearing the community and implementing their goals. I think the comp plan is the best way to do that, but obviously there's opportunity for better listening. As an example, Carousel of Smiles came in the other day. They wanted to know when they can start, what's the process to start planning for a building and the placement of the Carousel of Smiles on the former Edgewater Hotel by City Beach parking lot area. I told them, I don't know, but what I would imagine is that we would want to have a very clear direction from the citizens that this is a place that is appropriate for that. If we're going to lease them that property, and I suggested maybe it goes on to the November ballot as a city decision to determine whether or not the citizens want us to proceed with exploring that. Obviously, I bring that, they'd come to the council and request that sort of thing, but that's an example of evolving a dynamic role where the council and the city can react to citizens' ideas and concerns and preferences. It's pretty cheap visiting Melissa to put something, a non-binding question on an existing, ballot measure. So, or ballot. So those are some options. Optimizing operations, the ERP software, obviously that ties into a lot of what we're doing, and we're making some changes right now. BSA Cloud, updating the city website right now, that's ongoing, should be launched by July, which is going to be way better and provide much clearer information to the citizens and to y'all.
Sorry, that makes me laugh because I remember when this one was.
Yeah. Oh, how great it was.
The other one used to be DOS. Pretty much. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Wasn't it, Melissa? It was like green screen stuff.
Oh, yeah.
We were on that committee. I remember that too. 2014. I believe.
Yep.
You guys are dissing this one, but you don't know where this one came from.
Right.
Yeah.
So all the departments are working together collaboratively to make those decisions, and we'll do a reveal and get your feedback. Obviously, citywide staffing structure and the 5-year plan to align with that and our related capital projects and growth. Kept in, implementation for centralized fleet and equipment maintenance and management. These last two are really kind of something I care a lot about in light of Chinese hacks and other attacks and AT&T going off last week and other concerns, but making sure that we have an emergency response plan, working with Bonner County and Bob Howard, Corey, and of course, EMS and fire. And then finally, that citywide disaster preparedness plan. I don't have a binder on my desk. I wish I did, that I turn to that says, this is what you do if this happens, but that's what I envision and would like.
That's what the residents would like as well.
Right.
From what I hear.
Right. So that's pretty standard. And then 2 left, strengthen intergovernmental relations. Obviously, the airport is an area they've asked for someone to be designated on the airport advisory board, but we need to certainly, due to the economic importance of the airport, make sure that we have, great communications and are aligned with their needs and goals. Obviously, reviewing contracts for service and opportunities that could have advantages in terms of fiscal savings, whether that's, sharing a back truck or a asphalt grinder or something else. Obviously, the urban area transportation plan, get that updated and completed. That's working its way through BCAT right now. And finally, retouching on our water utility boy, we're gonna have to work really hard with Ponderay and Kootenai and other units of government to work that out. So that's gonna take some strong relationships.
So that piece, we did those whole studies, and so I'm a little lost.
The studies that you're referring to, like
Water rates.
Yeah,
rate
the
studies?
Rate studies and
Yeah.
all that, yeah, all of that, so.
It
Right.
just tells us where the problems are. It doesn't tell us how to fix it.
Well, we're
Well, no,
raising,
we were raising
rates by
rates. I mean,
19%
that
here
was
for the
all
next
put
3
out
years.
there as to how we.
Enoughs
were
have all
going
been
to
adjusted.
proceed.
Yeah.
So,
Correct. That was just a piece of it.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we're gonna have to make a decision on how we serve water outside the city limits.
This isn't just rates, this is actually what you're talking about.
Yeah, this is like,
Do we actually serve them anymore, or do we just?
okay.
Put
that-
it-
Master
this
meter.
just isn't about rate, this is
No.
about
So
how.
can you clarify, Jeremy, the districts that we sell wholesale to are Syringa, Northside, just those two?
Otherwise.
But then Ponderay, Kootenai, those are like, they have their own meter. Each household has a meter and pays for the water that we sell them directly. We're not
and
doing
our
wholesale.
people go out there and
Yeah.
measure the meters.
So your suggestion is that in the next 5 years, we perhaps put up a master meter for Kootenai and a master meter for Ponderay, or that becomes a district, that they become like Northside and Syringa. So we no longer serve those individual households. We just sell wholesale.
And if they need a 18-inch pipe because they've got Costco
Their
coming,
problem.
That's their.
they figure it out. How do they pay for it? We don't have to be interjected every development proposal or sit with their planners and say, what's your growth projection? Oh, it's going to be commercial. You're going to need bigger systems. So really, yeah, try to get the horse back in the barn.
And release ourselves of the liability of their transmission system.
Well,
Yeah.
infrastructure is so incredibly expensive,
Yeah.
and that's something to be really, really aware of and careful about when we talk about areas of city impact,
Yeah.
because the reason that other countries in this world don't sprawl like we do is because they can't afford to build the infrastructure. Right?
You're absolutely right, Deb. I can't echo that hard enough that by providing infrastructure, you're basically empowering and subsidizing
Walmart.
unsustainable growth.
Well, and it's a fallacy to say that development pays for development, because if your development just pays to put in the infrastructure, they're not paying for the ongoing operation.
Yeah.
It's a Ponzi scheme, honestly.
It is.
And then finally, economic prosperity. This comes down to just 3 things for me. One, it looks like for Sura in the downtown area, we've got one project left, which is phase 3 from basically Bridge down to Lake or Superior. So that project, we're working on that actually right now. We'll start going out for design on that, trying to pull in some of the downtown waterfront concept phase 1 elements for how that alignment of Bridge and what that streetscape looks like. It's my hope that would be going through the process for design, and then construction in the next 2 years. So we're going to get going on that right away. You're going to be very involved in it. Support the growth of existing businesses and working towards economic diversification of our economy. We've already, in fact, just this week, Councilman Welker is already engaging with Department of Commerce for some grants. But one of the foremost things for me with 2 children getting out of high school is Sandpoint is such a unique mountain town. There is no other mountain town with an economic diversity that we have. And I like that term mountain town rather than resort town, although technically we obviously are a resort city, which
not for much longer.
has some advantages for us. But the fact that someone can get out of high school here and get a job at Lighthouse or Chava or UNICEF or DeHare or a variety of other businesses in town and grow their careers and their skill set is so amazing. I've seen it firsthand. Kids coming out of high school, getting apprenticeships and becoming experts in their field. And that's something I desperately don't want to lose in this community. I think it's what makes us distinct and makes us a real town. So that's sort of the goal under economic prosperity. Why not take this? And that obviously ties in things like secondary education and training opportunities, but the goal is how do we grow and support
Housing.
our existing business? You're gonna be having more housing than you know what to do with it in the next
Maybe
year
very
and a half.
short term, but.
Yeah, that's what they said in Steamboat
that's
20
never
years
gonna
ago.
Yeah,
go
right.
away.
Yeah, no, it's not gonna
Never
go away.
It
You're
didn't
right.
go away in Jackson, it didn't go away in Steamboat.
You're right.
It might be in a lull phase, but I'm not convinced that that's what's gonna happen in 5 years, Jeremy. I'm just
Yeah.
not buying that at all.
It's
It's gonna come back probably with a vengeance, and it may be worse the
Yep.
second go.
And we have some opportunities. I met with Conexu this last week. As you were aware, they're trying to put together a land trust model where you decouple the land from the housing, so you can basically make the housing less expensive, more affordable. And we have opportunities to look at that. If you're familiar with the blue buildings on North Boyer, we have a bunch of land there just north of Super One, where Pisney is today. That lease is going to be coming up in the foreseeable future. I think it's 2030, 29. So we've got land there we could potentially work with. I talked to Katie at Conexu. I said, look at the USDA, the Forest Service. Between the Catholic Church and the Forest Service, there's over 8 acres of land back there that's basically not being utilized. Is there an opportunity to work with them on that to do a community land trust for housing model? There are a couple other.
Put that check.
What's that?
You pulled that out of here.
I did, yeah.
Putting
yeah.
it back in.
Yeah, I'm just thinking 4 years, like what is, for me, it's the wastewater plant and our water and our streets. But
Right.
yeah, so that sort of summarizes it. I know it was brief, thanks. It kind of gives me an opportunity to at least tell you what I'm seeing and my concerns. And yeah, we'll schedule a full day and we can get into the nitty gritty and see if it's appropriate to append this to expand it. And I do like the thoughts of it drawn from the comp plan, because that's our most comprehensive understanding of what the community wants, but excited to keep working.
Can I share just a couple comments?
Please.
Before we wrap up. I've been through the strategic planning process a couple times now with organizations in our community. And I think what the previous plan lacked and what your plan also lacked, I mean, it's not your plan, right? You took the existing plan and put your spin on it. I think what our existing plan lacks in general is SMART goals. And I know this is so like industry cliche, but they really are important. And that stands for specific goals. These are almost every goal in our existing plan is very vague.
Teachers.
Measurable goals. How do we know if we've achieved this goal? Actionable. Is there actually something we can do based on this? Or is it just generally like evaluate the park system? That's not actionable. Evaluation happens daily. Relevant meaning they connect to our comprehensive plan. And then time bound. Within what time frame do we want to accomplish these? I honestly don't think any of the goals in our existing strategic plan are SMART goals. So my goal for our strategic plan, should we choose to actually update it and adopt it, would be to make sure that we have SMART goals in there that are all of those 5 things.
Yeah.
With and going back to the budgeting, like how do our staff know what they should be focused on? We have a comp plan. You can't say like, oh, I'm going to do this chapter of the comp plan this year. It's a 20-year comp plan. Like, what do we need to do in the next 5 years too? And I also, one other thing I'd like to see, and I noticed you took reference to every adopted community master plan out. The only master plan reference is the not yet developed stormwater master plan. I think some of those plans deserve to be addressed specifically in our strategic plan. So the historic preservation plan, the watershed recreation plan, the multimodal transportation plan, there was reference to all of those in the previous, in the existing strategic plan. You took all those out. I think we as a council should discuss which of our adopted community master plans do we want to continue working towards in the next 5 years, because they are adopted and there are really important things in most of them.
Some of them are old.
Yeah.
And I just
But a lot of them are quite new, like the urban forestry plan, 3 years old.
Deb's got to get lunch.
Yeah, so I would just like to ask, since we did the split screen and I brought that whole thing up, that we take the old strategic plan and we give staff, a little, couple of paragraphs or whatever it is to explain to everybody why that dropped off. Maybe it's because that was completed. So I'd really like to hear that. And I'm sure that the new counselors would really appreciate that, because they don't know as much historically. So just giving a staff a heads up to the things that maybe where some of those things went.
Sure.
Or if we should still be concerned with them because they still exist, but they weren't a priority for you. So
Yep.
that's why they.
Yep.
So thank you guys.
Thanks, Deb.
A couple minutes to eat, and then I got a patient one, so.
we'll see you tonight. And then the other thing is, just for context, the reason it's kind of narrowed down is because looking at our capacity, I know we can chew gum and walk at the same time, but like what's accomplishable, what's realistic, it's like this is going to take a huge effort to get the wastewater plant done and our streets figured out and our water distribution system figured out. And that's, I don't care if I'm not here in 5 years. That's what I want to get done. And I know based on feeling what we have right now for staff and resources, like this is going to be a huge push just to do this stuff. So it's nice to have other things in terms of performance benchmarks and performance measures that we're getting there. Great to monitor, but the wastewater plant is,
Has to be.
man, it's.
And so didn't we, and I know you said we lost a grant. I thought a couple of years ago, there was an opportunity for a grant and we were all supposed to write to the city to grab a grant and.
Yeah, so with the
That's what I remember.
The Inflation Reduction Act and Recovery Act, there was an opportune time. Hundreds of millions of dollars
Right.
flowed into Idaho for infrastructure.
Right.
Unfortunately, we missed the opportunity there. That money has all been allocated, almost all of it. So
I think there's new coming out. I don't know if you guys know Katrina Pielli. She works for the Department of Energy. She's a local homegrown girl who is now working remotely in town, and she has asked the DOE if she could be on our sustainability committee. She
Great.
just sent an application in. She presented the other day to a group of a lot of more money coming.
Yeah.
So maybe she's a good
Resource,
source to find out what possibilities there are coming up.
Yeah.
She said there's a whole slew of.
So
other grants.
Idaho has gone to state primacy for wastewater. DEQ now takes the role of what used to be the EPA. So we as a state manage the dollars that are given us. So DEQ is going to be our lead agency on the wastewater plant.
Okay.
So again, I spent over an hour with the regional director last 2 weeks ago, and he gave me a pretty good setup of what's available. Other applications, the big thing is by next January, there's a letter of interest we have to put in.
Okay.
Showing our funding capacity and what the plan is for the
So
plan.
do they share the same promise of money coming in?
Yeah, it's a
as she did?
I don't even know how to describe it. I know that it's a somewhat political decision. They look at our rates, what the bond would do to our rates, to the average median income household, what those rates would be as a proportion of their income. If it exceeds that, they really work hard to get you grants to bring it down. So first and foremost, though, is to show them that we have the ability to do this without any help, basically, and then they backfill it.
Okay.
And then it's contacting senators and congressmen and earmarking and trying to get federal funding specific for our project.
And that was part of a whole rate study. We've already raised rates for the sewer 2 times now, 19%, with the last one coming through in October, and that's to get us up to the amount that we have to be to get basically.
And I think that's something that needs to be educated with the public.
Oh, yeah.
Because all they're seeing is rate increase, and now we want to redo the whole.
Right. No, it's going to take a lot of public outreach.
Education.
Because and barring judicial confirmation for something like this, which is where the voters denied the bond.
Right.
There's the other option to go to the courts and say it's necessary. We're going to do everything we can to bring the voters up to speed on why this is essential.
Right.
We all love the lake. We all love clean water. We all want to flush our toilets. So, and our staff, I can't, if you ever have a free hour, just go down there and say thank you to Devin and his crew down there, because.
Well, I've been trying to work on getting a tour. I was told we'd have one, and I know Melissa's talked about it, and I included you, and I know Justin asked also.
It's more enjoyable when the weather's a little better. Having been on the tour.
When the weather's what?
A little better.
When I worked in Ketchum,
on the ballot this November.
that
That would
wastewater
be the
treatment
goal.
plant
Okay.
is pure
was
and
gonna be my question.
beautiful. It is amazing. And they pump right back into the Wood River. I mean, it can be done. It doesn't have to stink.
No,
I know that.
no, well, it's more the effluent. Just to FYI, I mentioned this, but a typical, when that plant's operating at optimum capacity, it's 9 hours for a drop of sewage to come in, go through the process, and then go out. When we get rain on snow, that can be as quick as 45 minutes. The contact time for the chlorine that kills the E. coli is ideally 9 hours going through that chamber. It can be minutes when we get snow and rain event and all that is flowing through there, which means they crank up the chlorine as high as they legally can without storing more down there. And that kills the E. coli. But if those flows drop, they have to crank it back because you can't exceed your chlorine output as well. So they're literally pulling levers down there, ripping motors out. I mean,
I bet those are horrible pictures.
It's really
Scary.
not ideal.
Do we have any evidence to suggest that a stormwater plan could mitigate some of that?
Yeah, briefly, we've spent a lot of money and done a lot of work on infiltration, I&I. And what the engineers have told me is that we've gotten the easy low-hanging fruit. You know, our laterals, we get the slip program. When you sell a house, you have to inspect and replace your lateral. The challenge is we sit on hundreds of feet of clay, and unlike the Rathdrum Prairie and Post Falls, when we get water in the soil or there's a leak or stormwater, it doesn't drain down. It finds the path of least resistance and it goes into our pipes. So 2 engineers told me it's unlikely we'll ever get I&I controlled like to a couple of 100,000 gallons a day without going to every house, finding every sump pump, forcing people to disconnect, and then basically not only is that like a Gestapo-like tactic, but then they're going to just be pumping it onto their yard, which is going to create a stormwater issue for us because the water's not going anywhere. So it's like it's either running through our sewer pipes or it's going to run on destroy our streets or in the back of Deb's yard. So that's why the stormwater utility and hopefully impact fees for stormwater could help us quite a bit.
But your sump pumps can run through the drainage, the stormwater drainage, just like rainwater does.
Right. Yeah.
Because that's what mine does.
Yeah. A lot of what I've been told is a lot of people down in their basements, you have a clean out.
Again, education,
they
can't, that's not.
When we have a slip program, why couldn't you have a similar program for that? It wouldn't happen immediately, but as houses get sold, you'd say you also have to.
It's as easy as going to Home Depot and throwing a sump pump in and taking the cap off and putting it in. If you've got a wet basement,
you can also take it out for the inspection and put it right back in the next day.
Yeah. So the engineers basically said you're never going to do it through enforcement like that, unless you're like sending people into people's homes every week. So there are technologies, talking to engineers, that allow for that dynamic flow. You know, in the summer, it's pretty constant. It's the rain on snow events. And there are technologies in the treatment side that can respond to that and treat it appropriately with like these huge, you know, divergence of flow. So that's probably the type of technology we'd be looking at the wastewater plant.
I've asked ICL because they do the water quality monitoring on the lake to test the water that's going in to Sand Creek and all the big
stormwater.
And they're like, good idea.
And that happens. That'll kick in when we hit 10,000 people. There's a federal law that requires us to manage our stormwater and treat our stormwater.
Right.
So that's part of this whole stormwater.
I walked along there and watched all that.
Having said that, thank you all for your time.
No, thanks
and
to you as well.
Thanks to Fonda.
Yeah.
Thank you, Fonda and
thanks for
Zach.
the
Absolutely. And
Melissa.
Information.
yeah, we will be reconvening tonight at 5. And with that, I adjourn this 5:30 during this meeting at 12:45.